The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Ah, the web tour. Those that both created and were created by the threads disentangle from the fringes to feast on the very thing that spawned them.
What's up, Tilly? This is how you deal with weird!
No! Do not harm my children!
Oh, you lost a feather. Can I keep it?
No, you can't force me to!
Do you know what lies within nothing?
Rocket's in trouble, Akasa! Can we turn on the windshield remotely?
No, she could lose her job as an Akasar.
I don't fear Vehar.
No, but you fear me. If you intend to trick me, I will not hesitate to sever the oath bond entirely.
Why didn't you help me? Coward! I don't have a parachute! I don't like free falling!
Counterbalance, a high fantasy audio drama. Season 2, coming 15th of October 2023. Learn more on trilunas.com.
Hello, and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. This is the Mary Queen of Scots series part. I've lost track. I want to say 8, perhaps, but anyway, my name is Ann Foster. I'm joined by Allison Epstein. Allison, welcome.
Thank you. I also don't know what part we're on, but we'll figure that out before it posts.
Yeah, absolutely. We will. There's a part in all my notes where I'm like previously on. And at this point, I think I wrote just kind of like listen to all the episodes.
Previously, a lot.
A lot. A Douglas. And also a lot. This is, in fact, part 8. We are on Mary Queen of Scots, part 8. And yes, what I wanted to mention, I've said this before, but it becomes increasingly unhinged to me that I ever thought I was going to tell this story in 4-hour-long episodes.
That's hilarious.
That is wild. That is wild.
Adorable and hilarious.
I think my plan had been to do in one episode, like the murder of Rizzio, the murder of Darnley, and also running away with Bothwell. I thought that's a cool 45 minutes, 60 minutes.
And you spent an hour and 15 minutes on who is Rizzio? What's his deal?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I did 3 episodes before she even married Darnley. And then what we're talking about today, like spoiler for how many episodes there's going to be. I thought this was going to, like the contents of this and the next 2 episodes, I thought it was going to be another cool 45 minutes. And you were the one who was like, okay, Anne, like.
Anne? I admire your ambition here, but I would book 5 hours.
Yeah. And that is how long it will take, is my guess. So I wanted to say, first of all, before I forget my references for this. So it's been interesting. I read so much Mary Queen of Scots stuff, so many biographies of this person who, the other irony. Okay, I'm going to say two things. First of all, sometimes people, when I post an episode, people send me messages and I'm like, I guess that like quoting something and like a laughing emoji. And I'm like, perhaps that is something I said. I don't remember. I don't remember what I've said before, especially in these extremely long episodes, these Mary Queen of Scots episodes. So I might be repeating myself, but whatever. Also, I was like, Mary Queen of Scots season. I've been holding off on doing it for a while. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And this will be kind of straightforward because this is a story I know pretty well. And that's the thing. If I had just done this without any new research, it would have been 4 45-minute episodes. But as soon as I started reading actual books, I was just like, oh shit, there's like so much stuff I did not know. Like I knew more than some people about Mary Queen of Scots. And now I know more than many people.
Almost anybody.
Yeah, there's so many things I truly did not know. And this part that we're talking about, this post-Loch Leven era, is the part I think I knew the least about. And that is because I think in a lot of books and also in movies and TV shows, although this was not Rain's fault, they were canceled, this part of her whole life often gets glossed over. Like a lot of things kind of go from like her being arrested in the first place, and then it's like time passes, and then it's her death. Like spoiler, she does die. Not in this episode. Not in next episode. This part just gets skipped over a lot because whenever people are telling her story, it's always like Darnley, Rizzio, like that's like Bothwell, like that's the story that people often retell. But this is, I would say, no less interesting. It's just a different kind of interesting because we're getting into some spy shit. Allison, what are your feelings about Mary, Queen of Spy shit?
This is how I know Mary best as Mary, Queen of Spy shit. She is love of my life, schemer of schemes. I'm very, very excited to talk about this part. And it's my favorite part of the story, not because Mary is winning a lot, but because she's up against some absolutely incredible odds that no like human being has the wherewithal to win against. She's in a very hard spot at this time in the story. Every day of her life, she wakes up and goes, how can I scheme my way out of this one? Never gives up, never surrenders. She's a legend. Very excited to get into it.
It's very exciting. It's a different vibe. She's in England now. And like the vibe in Scotland was just like groups of men getting together, signing paperwork, doing chaotic mass murders, and then not thinking about the consequences. England is like, let's write some letters and be very like passive aggressive with each other and like just secretly be scheming, but outwardly be polite. Like it's a very different vibe.
Because here's the thing, and we're going to get into it, but when Mary was in Scotland, Mary was the smartest person in the room by like a not insignificant amount. We witnessed how good the asshole lords are not at scheming. So Mary was like, okay, guys, let me just scheme my way around this one more time. This is the worst planned murder I've ever heard of. Why are you signing your names on everything? England's a different story, and so she's going to have to adapt.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of like I do not know what your experience was going to school, so I can only speak for myself, but it was like I have always been like good at writing. Like I wrote a better essay than most people even if like there was no thesis to it, even if it was like not everyone the teachers are just like, "Oh, this is fine." So I never really had to learn how to be good because my natural ability was like okay. And then I got to do a master's program and suddenly they were like, this isn't a good paper. You don't have a thesis. And I was like, but I have never needed a thesis.
I've always been
my professor
enough.
Like the fact that I wrote complete sentences got me through an entire undergraduate degree, a high school. Like, so suddenly I had to step my shit up, right?
Yes.
Because it's like, oh, I can do it. It's just suddenly it's more work. And I feel like that's what Mary experienced. It's like she could get out of how many times did she climb out of a window? How many times did she manipulate somebody? Like she got out of these shitty situations basically every time. But in England, it's just like the people she's up against, it's not the asshole lords. It is people who we will talk about in detail soon. People who Allison knows a lot about. A lot more than I do. But we know like William Cecil, right? We've seen his looming puppet mastery previously. Like he is frighteningly competent.
There's William Cecil on one hand and Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart on the other hand. And you're like, okay, you're going to have to scheme in different ways to get around these men.
Yes, exactly. So the books that I read, I think the point that he started making several minutes ago was it's been changing. Like each episode, like there's some core titles that I've been using for everything, but I've really sort of for this era, I've got some new sources. So I was looking at a book called The Betrayal of Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth I and Her Greatest Rival by Kate Williams. As Per Ever, Embroidering Her Truth by Claire Hunter, the book about embroidery and textiles and Mary Queen of Scots, because we're going to get into some
Which we're gonna get into this time.
I've been like this Claire Hunter book, honestly, game changer. It's so good. I am going to actually be having a special episode with Claire Hunter coming up later where we're going to deep dive into these textiles and these embroideries.
That
But
was a real gasp for me, listeners. I'm very excited about that one, and I didn't know.
oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. No, I'm so excited to share that episode with her. But yeah, that book was because it really gets into for her, she was seeing like Mary Queen of Scots did not leave diaries, right? But what she did do is Claire Hunter was looking at the lists of like, here's the fabrics she ordered and when, and what did the fabrics look like? And that's where you can see what she was thinking. That's where like, oh, she marries Darnley and suddenly all of her fabrics are in color. Like you see what she's doing. But then also the embroideries are as close as we have to Mary's diaries because you're like, what was she making? What were the subjects she was choosing? And then Claire is like a really, really, really expert person about this sort of topic. She is a stitcher herself. So she could look at the stitchery and see like, oh, these stitches here are even and these ones are more spaced out. It's like you can tell she was upset. So like what you can learn from her from this is like huge. So we're going to touch on that a bit today, but like listeners, please know in I think 2 weeks, you're going to get like me talking to Claire Hunter for an hour, just being like, Claire, tell us about this. Please tell us about this. So another book that I turned to for the first time, and thank God, okay, this is a book called Imprisoning Mary Queen of Scots, The Men Who Kept the Stuart Queen by Mickey Mayhew. So this is a book, I want to shout out Pen and Sword Press, because every time I was looking for a book about like a weird, strangely tangential person, I was like, oh my God, there's a book about it. It's like Pen and Sword Press. Like Pen and Sword Press is just filling in all the gaps about the like the Tudor era with books about like the most obscure of people. I'm pretty sure they're the ones who published the book about Scottish Machiavelli, his biography. Like Pen and Sword Press, bless you. I know you follow me on TikTok. I don't know if you listen to this podcast,
And
but
if you would
like
like to be a sponsor of this podcast.
what you do with these books about these like incredibly obscure people is so helpful. Because looking at this part, Mary's England era, like other books, so Claire Hunter, a lot of good information from that. The Kate Williams book, lots of good information. But I really wanted to have like a chronological thing of like what happened when, and a larger book like by I understand they sort of like wrap things up to be like, and over the next 7 years, these things happened. And I was like, no, but what order did they happen in? What I wanted to know. And that's where this book came in. Anyway, there's also an article from History Today by Cyril Hampshire about the Ridolfi plot, which we will be talking about, and which I really needed to get someone like Cyril Hampshire. This was an article from like the 1970s, but it's online. Bless you, History Today. Cyril Hampshire really lays it out. And then an article from BBC, which is also about the various plots. Now, I do want to mention, and we're going to get into this more next time, recently some guys found some letters that Mary Queen of Scots wrote in code and they decoded them. But the stuff that is in those letters is like next week's episode is when those letters are from. But that's what I said before, like Mary Queen of Scots, she didn't have diaries. What did she think? These ciphered letters, like
pretty close.
We're going to know. Yeah, next time we're going to get into that. Those letters are not from this era. So, and also I have to say, I did look at Alison's book, A Tip for the Hangman, but that's again more next week's episode where I learned some things from you, from your book. About various plots. I was like, Alison, explain it to me through fiction. Thank you. Okay, so I have a couple notes that I just wanted to say. It's been a couple weeks since we recorded, and I just had some thoughts I wanted to share, things that have been occurring to me. So I just wanted to go through the numbers. So Mary Queen of Scots, she became Queen of Scots when she was 6 days old. When she was 15, she became Queen of France. She was widowed for the first time, age 18. Then she ruled in Scotland from ages 18 until 24, when she was forced to abdicate. Remember, before her 25th birthday, when like all these things would have happened. So she ruled in Scotland for 6 years, which is like when you look at other people who've ruled other places, it's like 6 years is actually kind of standard. Like it's an outlier to have somebody like Elizabeth I who rules for decades and decades. Like 6 years, and 6 years, the 6 years she ruled, like God bless. Like
What the
I
6 years
mean,
they were.
honestly, yeah. But I mean, think of other people in similar positions. Like, for instance, her cousin, Lady Jane Grey, who also had assholes manipulating her all the time, and she only managed to reign for 9 days. Like, it's like cat years. Mary reigned in Scotland for 6 years, but that's like 25 non Scotland years, really, in terms of what an impressive feat that was.
I'm gonna toss a Jesus Christ Superstar reference to your listeners, which is she died for
Yeah.
3 years and it felt like 30. A lot
Yes.
of work.
It was. It was. And she also had like chronic medical conditions.
Right.
Like there's a lot going on. So like she's jumping out of windows. Like when she was growing up in France, being raised by Catherine de Medici and the de Guise uncles, like they were teaching her spy shit. They were teaching her ciphered letters. They were teaching her how to manipulate an emissary. They weren't teaching her how to like tie a bedsheet into a rope, jump out a window and land on a horse. She just figured that out herself. Like the stuff she's doing in Scotland was not what she was raised to do. That was not what she was taught to do. That was just her figuring it out, honestly, incredibly well, are my thoughts. I mean, it just bothers me. So, like, I'm not going to call out any specific books. I got great information from all the books I read, but some of the books I read are like, oh, this tragic life of this person who made so many bad mistakes, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, whomst among us has not made bad mistakes? Like, I'm not here to be like, she was perfect and everything she did was great, but I am trying to sort of like course correct the general record, which is like she was a sad woman who lived a sad life and she just sat around being sad all the time. She was like you explained, Allison, like she woke up every day to be like, how can I scheme my way out of this now? Like, of course she was sad sometimes. We're all sad
Of
sometimes.
course she cried sometimes. Some of us cry a lot. It's not our fault. History.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that I really don't like when people are like, she was a tragic figure. Her life was tragic. It's like everyone dies at the end of our story, and it depends what part of the story you tell. And if you're doing like a birth to death, then inherently, oh, it's sad at the end because that person's going to die. But if you told, and I love this concept, no one's done it. Someone should. If someone out there is listening, not you, Allison. I know you have other projects on the go. Someone else who is a historical fiction novel writer. You could take the story of Mary Queen of Scots and end it in some sort of happy point. You know, like you could write the story of Mary Queen of Scots and end it after she triumphantly re-enters Edinburgh after Rizzio's murder. Like you could end it. You don't need to end it at one of the sad points, but everyone always does, which just kind of drives home the fact that like it's a sad story. It's like she won so many times against every time Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart raised an army against her. She beat him except for the final time. Like,
Right.
she did really great so many times. And it just really bothers me when people are like, she was a dumb woman. She led from her heart. She like, oh my God, the whole story about like people are like, oh, she just like had a terrible choice in husbands. It's like, first of all, as I laid out in
You know who else had a terrible choice in husbands and wives? Every single Tudor monarch since the beginning of ever, and also all of the Stuarts.
Yeah. No, exactly. And the fact that people are like, oh, she was swept away with lust by Darnley. It's like, no, as I laid out in like an hour and 45 minutes, like politically, that was her best move at the time. He was a horrible person.
Yeah, he
and
just
that
sucks,
was not
guys. It's not her fault, but he just sucks.
And then, in my opinion, I don't think she ever chose Bothwell. I think Bothwell forced that situation upon her. So the fact that it's like, oh, she just like was swept away, she chose these bad husbands, and it was because of her choices in her love life. It's like, really, no. And I mean, we're going to talk about this later. I keep saying stuff we're going to talk about later. I've had several weeks to think about this, and I'm just like, I have things I want to tell Allison. But like everything people say, the haters about Mary, her son was that.
Yes, we had this
James?
conversation last night. James, man.
Oh my gosh, like he was a whore. He was the one who like fell in love with men and then who were like literal grifters, one after another, like gave them titles and jobs and
You
like
want someone who led with the heart and the dick as King James the First. It's not
Yeah.
Mary.
No, like everything, which is like which I find increasingly interesting and increasingly why I'm just like, I think I might need to do like a little follow-up season about James, because everything that people are like, oh, Mary's going to do this, she's like this. It's like, she wasn't. She was like an extremely Catholic woman who was like very conservative in a lot of ways. And they're all like, oh, she's so slutty and so trampy. And it's like, she wasn't. Her son was. She was not. Anyway, I just wanted to like get my feelings a bit about how she's actually great. I'm looking at my notes. It's like, people say she's passionate. I'm like, yep, no, I said that inherently. Okay, yeah, this is where I just want to point out part of what Rain got correct. So, which is like the overall vibes is what I want to say. So, for instance, in season 1 of Rain, there's an episode like based not in fact, which that's not the show's deal and whatever. So there was an episode, it was one of those episodes, you know, on a TV show where it's just like, oh, everyone's all in the same room. It's like a bottle episode where it's like, let's just all film in one set for one day. So something happens, I forget what, but all the men have to leave because there's like, they have to fight a battle. So it's just the women left in the castle. It's like Mary, her ladies in waiting, Catherine de Medici. And then the castle is attacked by men from Naples, who I never stop finding funny, are called Neapolitans.
That makes me laugh every
So
time. Thank you for saying that. It's Florentines too makes me laugh, and I know that's silly. They're just goofy names for people. I'm sorry to the country of Italy, but every time I'm like, that's food.
No.
That's not people.
I was recapping Rain when this episode came out, and the amount of times I said the evil Neapolitans. It was gratuitous. Anyway, so the Neapolitans come in and Mary and Catherine like scheme their way out of this situation. And so earlier in the episode, in a way, like obviously it pays off, but at the time I was just like, oh, they're like, this is airing at the same time as Downton Abbey. And you know, on Downton Abbey, they'd always be like, this is a toaster. Oh, yeah. I don't know.
What is a weekend?
Yeah, so they're like introducing things to be like telephone to make us feel superior and to make us think people in the past were dummies. So in Rain, in the beginning of the episode, they were like, this is a fork. And they're like, I don't know about this. I prefer eating with not a fork. But at the end, like, does this episode end with Mary stabbing a Neapolitan in the eye with a fork? It does.
Bless. Love.
So,
legend.
This is where I love the show. But like, Mary did not stab a Neapolitan in the eye with a fork, but she had a real fork stab to the eye energy is what I want to say. Like Rain got that right. And I love that for that show. I love that people who watched that show who didn't know who she was were just like, who is this badass woman who, like, whenever she's backed in a corner, like pulls out some amazing scheme and does great, because that's what she actually was like. Like, it's for so long, it's just been like, oh, especially in the 19th century when all those paintings came out of her just like swooning and being tragic. Like, it really built up this thing about she was just this sad sado who's just like dragged around and manipulated by people. But it's like, no, she was like someone who, like, metaphorically would stab a Neapolitan in the eye with a fork. And that is what she was like. Like, she did what she needed to be done. She would put in a disguise. She would pretend like she was in love with Darnley. She would ride a horse while pregnant for 5 hours, rally an army, like climb out a window. Like, these are things she did. It's got, what I have to say, is a real Fredegund style energy.
Yes, it does. If she could disguise an entire army's trees, she would have done that.
Yeah, exactly. There's a part in the Fredegund story where she, like, new listeners, I did 3 hours of episodes about Fredegund.
Which at the time seemed like a lot of hours for a single person.
It was. How long-winded I've become. Like, I'm sure if I did that again, it would be longer. But so Fredegund was a queen of a part in what is now France, and like centuries and centuries before Mary Queen of Scots. But anyway, she was great. There's a part in the story where Fredegund they were under siege. She had like just given birth, and her husband was like, I don't know what to do. And Fredegund was like, you bitch, like, listen up. She, like, just having given birth, covered in birth juices, like, got her little newborn baby with her, and she's like, here's what we're gonna do. And then she, like, invents how to have shelf-stable poisons on knives, like manipulates 2 young servants into going on a suicide mission to, like, kill the enemy king. Like, and that's what Mary's energy is to me. It's like, she's like, when she's backed in it, she's never more powerful than when she's in what seems like an impossible situation. Interestingly, Fredegund is also always talked about in contrast with Fredegund and Brunhild, like 2 queens. So I don't know, Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth, similar vibes. Anyway, here we are. What just happened was she had just lost a battle to Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart. And she was just like, I don't know what to do. And then, controversially, to some people who think she's an idiot, decides to go to England. And it's also really easy to be like, that was a bad decision when you know what the repercussions are. But she didn't know what the repercussions would be. She was making a judgment call. And if she went to France, things maybe would have gone badly in a different way. Who knows? So it's Mary. She's got like 16 or so loyal people with her. Bear in mind, at this point, she has shaved her head. Like, I'm pretty sure I mentioned that last time, but like to put on her pants disguise and to really, she had this very signature, like crimped red hair. So she's just like shaved head. They never put that in any of the movies.
Which is a shame, because, like, how badass is that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So anyway, so they arrive in England. Mary was apparently in high spirits and very talkative. So famously, again, I don't know what's famous to not me, she stumbled when getting out of the boat. That happens in a lot of the movies.
Also happens every time I get out of a boat. So, like, cut her a break.
Especially, yeah, exactly. So it's like, oh, is this a bad omen? But I feel like in terms of her and boat-based omens, the worst one so far was when she was going from France to Scotland and the boat of other people all drowned in front of her.
We've had worse boat omens in our days.
This seems like, by contrast, maybe a good omen.
No one's dead.
Yeah. So this is where Mary, queen of like the tourism industry of the British Isles, the amount of castles she slept at least one night in, I think,
is every
when we get
castle
into talking
in the Isles. Yes.
Yeah. There's anyway. So this is where, like, if you're, I don't know. I feel like in my retirement years, I was talking with one of the listeners, Laura Lee. She was saying like it would be great to do a trip just to like follow Mary's footsteps. But we both agreed like that would be multi-months long, the amount of places she went. If we all had to sleep in one night in every castle she slept one night in, like this would take a year.
And we would all have to sleep on trunks in the hallway because there wouldn't be enough beds.
Yes. Oh, R.I.P. Rizzio. So the castle that she arrives in, if you're planning this trip for yourself, is called Workington Hall. And so they arrived. And so one of her guys, they didn't want to be like, it's Mary Queen of Scots. So they sent a message to the owner of Workington Hall, Sir Henry Kerwin. And they were like, hey, so we're just here with this young Scottish heiress. We thought that we're just visiting. We thought maybe she could be a potential bride for your son. Can we just like hang out in your castle for a while?
Her head is shaved. Don't mind that. It's normal in Scotland.
Yeah, don't worry about it. That's just what the Scottish ladies are doing these days. Yeah, she's wearing pants. Also, that's just a very
she's 6
Scottish
feet tall. Don't worry about
her. So he was not there, but they were like allowed to hang out in the house based on this story. But pretty for all the reasons you just said, the people in Workington were pretty much right away like, this is fucking Mary Queen of Scots. Like this, this is clearly Mary Queen of Scots. So the deputy governor of Cumberland arrived with 400 men to be like, hey, Mary Queen of Scots, like welcome to England, etc. And so they were going to escort her to Carlisle Castle, which I guess is like a more appropriate place for queen to be. En route, they passed through Cockermouth.
Which cannot be a real place, England. What are you doing?
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. So I do want to say, I think at least 3 people who are from England let me know that last time I pronounced the name of a place as Skilly because that is how it is spelled. It is in fact pronounced Silly.
Which is a silly way of saying that place if there's a K in it somewhere.
It's England. I'm going to do my best. But like the people who corrected me, I responded to each of them being like, why is it spelled that way then? And they were all like, I know, it's wild. And I'm like, so I'm going to do my best. But some of these words like,
tell us after. We're doing our best.
It's the English language. So I'm going to interpret them as I understand the way that English letters work. Anyway, so Cockermouth. A local merchant presented her with a length of black velvet and instructed that a black gown be made for her. So thank you to this man. I feel like this is like the ghost of Rizzio.
Get this lady a costume. She loves an outfit.
She needs an outfit. So then she arrived at Carlisle Castle. She wrote a letter to Elizabeth. So previously, she had written one to Elizabeth being like, hey, can I come to England? But she came to England before she heard back. So she arrived there. So she wrote Elizabeth another letter being, I guess, like, guess what? I'm in England.
Assuming you said yes and it was delayed in the mail.
Yeah. So she explained, just so there could be no confusion, like she abdicated, but she hadn't wanted to. In case that's why Elizabeth didn't help her out, Mary was like, in case you're like, oh, this lady abdicated, so I don't like her. It's like, I didn't want to abdicate. I was forced into it. And she's like, let's meet. Let's meet each other. Because after every time they tried to meet, I think the De Guise uncles kept doing massacres and it kept not happening.
Happens.
So she hoped like she could see Elizabeth in person, and she hoped that her own personal charisma, which is like at a supernatural level from everything that she's done, Elizabeth would be so moved that she could provide Mary with money and soldiers so Mary could swoop back into Scotland and take over as queen again. So she figured, and this is the vibe of this is very much like when COVID first started, and we're all like, oh, I guess we'll work from home for like 1 or 2 weeks, maybe a month max. So Mary is like, okay, like it'll probably, to get this together, this force, I'll be in England probably 1 to 2 months, and then I'll go back to Scotland and take over again. She signed off this letter as your loyal and affectionate good sister and cousin, an escaped prisoner.
She's so dramatic. I love her so much.
She's great. Her letters, like which we're going to get into more later, but like there's so much personality in them. Her writing style is really, you really see what she's like. And to my delight, she is just like what I thought she was like.
100%.
Which is,
yes.
Yeah,
Love.
Exactly. So Carlisle Castle, it's more of a fortress than a cozy home. She stayed in a place that is now called Queen Mary's Tower because that's how you get the tourists there. Actually, so it was called Queen Mary's Tower. It's now demolished, but you can go there and stand where it was, which, to me is fine. I'd be like, oh my God, this is where the tower was when Mary's, like, I am the tourist who would go there and pay money to see that. So at this point, she's being treated as a guest, not as a prisoner. So, okay, there's going to be, I didn't count because I have other things to do in my life, but I feel like at this point in this series, we've had like 85 named characters, mostly
James.
Mostly James. We're in England, so we're going to have several Williams now and Roberts, but some of those people are going to recur. And I have to say, when they came up in my research, when I was reading, I'm like, oh my God, that guy again. I'm like, I have to include that so everyone can know what happened to him. But there's going to be some new people, and I'm going to give them some nicknames because whimsy is required. And also, otherwise, I'm not going to remember the difference between like the Earl of this and the Earl of such and such. So here we have Carlisle Castle. The governor of the castle is Henry Lord Scrope. So he was in London, actually, when Mary arrived, but they're like, hey, Mary Queen of Scots is at your castle, Henry Lord Scrope. And he's like, oh shit. So then he like came to his castle he came with his friend, Sir Francis Knowles.
Of the Lettice Knowles?
The dad of Lettice Knowles.
Yes.
Sir Francis Knowles. Yes. So we're going to call him, for the rest of the story, Mr. Lettice, or Lettice's dad.
Which he would hate, being a Tudor man, but
I'm sure, yeah. So it took them 10 days to get there. I feel like that's not 10 days away, but they got there 10 days after, because I guess maybe they were instructed by Cecil and other people of like, here's what you do, here's the play. So when Elizabeth found out that Mary was in England, she was just like, wait, what? It's like when you see a friend and you're like, hey, yeah, let's have lunch. And if your friend shows up at your workplace to be like, we're having lunch, right? Like, oh no, that was just polite. I was just saying that wasn't an actual invitation. So yeah, she's like, I wrote her some nice letters, and she helped out in Loch Leven, if you will recall. Like, she really helped Mary not be assassinated there. But she's like,
we were sending secret dagger letters. It was a good time.
Yeah. But the whole thing with Mary is that she's a Catholic queen. Elizabeth is the Protestant queen. Anyone who wants Catholics to be in charge of England, Mary is their obvious like figurehead. So she knows that like if Mary's here, like that's going to get people maybe doing rebellions, like to try and make Mary be the queen.
Spoiler, Elizabeth is not wrong.
No. So like her very presence, somebody, whatever, tripled the threat of invasion from another place overnight just by being there. And tripled means because it's like Spain, France, like so many other Catholic, like Rome, like places. Yeah. Mary being there suddenly meant there's suddenly like actively 3 Catholic countries who might now like invade at any moment.
Not to mention all the Catholics who are already in England have been really pissed off for like 40 years. They're all like, okay, yeah, now it's time to go.
Exactly. Like her existence is really, really, she's not just like, sometimes I forget. It's not just like, hey, here's this cool person. It's like, oh no, she represents so much to so many people, Mary. So Elizabeth had an emergency meeting and she was like, I want to meet Mary and like hash this out. If you're playing along with the Mary Queen of Scots bingo card, which you can find on my Instagram page, Mary and Elizabeth almost meet is one of the squares. Anyway, so Elizabeth is like, I want to just meet her. Like, can I finally just like talk to her and like, let's figure this out? Cecil is like, oh no. Because Cecil knows that Mary is really, really, really persuasive and charming and sympathetic. And Elizabeth has been kind of sympathetic to her this whole time. Like, it wouldn't take much to tip Elizabeth over to like actually wanting to help her if she met her, because Mary has this superpower of persuasion. Elizabeth is kind of easy to manipulate. So Cecil is like, these women can never meet, basically.
And like, I don't know that Elizabeth is easy to manipulate generally, but queen to queen, like, there's not that many other people in the world who are in her situation. And so she's naturally going to be super sympathetic to Mary, who is extremely persuasive. Like, if some asshole from Spain came over and was like, hey, do you want to let my Catholic son in? I don't think she'd be persuaded in that way. But Mary is like, there's a spot in her heart for someone like Mary.
Exactly. Thank you for that clarification. Elizabeth, not easy to manipulate by Mary. Or she would be, because she has in the past been like very simple. And because of the whole thing about like whatever happens to Mary, it's like, well, a queen has to be treated like this and this and this. And if we suddenly stop treating queens like this, then
What's going to happen to
Elizabeth
me?
is at risk. Yeah, exactly. So that's like a big
Emotional,
thing
but
too.
it's also a political manipulation. She's like, I don't want anything bad to happen to Mary. And Cecil's like, I do, though. Please.
Yeah. So here's what my notes say. Cecil was like, oh, fuck. Elizabeth. And he's like, let's send him back to Scotland. And Elizabeth was like, how about fuck you, Cecil? No. And Cecil was like, okay, how about we fully investigate the Darnley murder in order to clear her name? And then we can maybe return her to Scotland, but just as like a figurehead. She won't be in charge, but like the assholes will still be in charge. I don't know. It wasn't like a real plan, but that's what Cecil said he wanted to do. And did I tell you already that Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart is in charge of Scotland? I think I did.
I think so,
Yes,
but good reminder.
because yeah, after she abdicated, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart got his lifelong dream to be the regent of Scotland. So what Cecil kind of wanted was like, okay, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, who is easy to manipulate.
Yes.
By
anybody.
Yeah, keep him in charge, and Mary would be there, but just as kind of like, you know, your face would be on the coins, but you wouldn't like be in charge.
Which Mary would not, for one single frickin' second, have been okay with.
No, and that would never have worked.
No.
Like, anyway. So Mary was put under the protection of Letitia's dad. So, fun fact. So Sir Francis Knowles, his mother's name was also Lettice, surname Peniston.
I'm sorry, I'm 4. I'm 4 years old.
So Letitia's grandmother was Lettice Peniston, which is a great name. Which is in a sea of like Roberts and Williams and Marys, it's like, oh, Lettice Peniston, great, yeah.
I'm holding it together. We can continue.
Do you need to go to Cockermouth to think about this more?
Stop this! I am an adult human being.
Okay, so our Lettice knows who we know about, new listeners, because I did an episode about her a couple years ago. So at this point, Lettice Knowles is the same age as Mary Queen of Scots. They're both 25 years old. She was not yet married, Lettice, but we're going to keep up to date with what she does later on. So anyway, so Letitia's dad, I think, he treats Mary in an okay way, and I think it might be partially because she is the same age as his daughter, and so he's just kind of like sees her in a dad way, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
She's also like has red hair, and anyway. So Letitia's dad found Mary very nice and charming, even though she was a Catholic and a Protestant, and he was supposed to be her prison guard. He was kind of like, she's cool, this is fun. But he was the one who had to deliver all the bad news. So Elizabeth told him to tell Mary, like, we can't meet queen to queen. Mary burst into tears because she is a person who cries a lot, and that doesn't make her a weak person.
It makes her a person who cries a lot.
Yeah, so she burst into tears. I feel like, obviously, situationally, she reminded Letitia's dad that, like, because she's also told, like, they're going to investigate the Darnley murder and her involvement in it. And she was like, okay, but, like, you know, I wasn't involved in it. You know, I viewed paperwork with the signatures of all the people who were involved in it, which included Scottish Machiavelli, Jeremy Jem from Parks and Recreation, like all these people who are now kind of like in charge of Scotland. Those guys did it. They signed paperwork about it. Pretty sure Cecil has a copy. It was like, Elizabeth was like, I can't meet you face to face if you're like an on the run murderess. We need to like clear your name and maybe then we can see each other face to face. But I, the queen, can't be seen hanging out with a person who killed a king.
Which is Cecil's stalling tactic.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
you can meet her, but
exactly.
not until we've cleared her name from this murder, even though I have the list in my pocket of the people who did the murder. Just
Yeah,
not yet.
this murder that I, Cecil, arranged.
Yes.
Anyway, so Mary began writing to France. So she had an uncle. Her uncle was the de Guise Cardinal, Cardinal France, and also Charles was the king in France. He was the younger brother of her first husband, Francis. And so they kind of grew up together. Charles had always had kind of a crush on her. So he had maybe some feelings to want to help. She was like, send money or support, or like, I only have this one velvet dress from this guy in Cockermouth. Can you send me some fabric? And eventually, actually, Letitia's dad petitioned Liz and got Liz to send along. Sorry, my notes say Liz, not Elizabeth. So Liz.
She's Liz.
I'm not going to type out Elizabeth 10,000 times. Liz. So Elizabeth sent along some things for Mary to have more outfits, but unfortunately, there was either on purpose or not, the parcel that arrived contained some pieces of black velvet, some ripped shirts, and random velvet shoes. So it's like, was that the bag you were taking to Goodwill, or was that the bag of things for Mary Queen of Scots? Like, oh no. So either this was an intentional insult, or like they just sent the wrong parcel. And at this point, I think it was the wrong parcel because Elizabeth was being kind to Mary at this point. Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart even sent along some outfits from Scotland, but again, he doesn't know fashion. He doesn't know what she wants. He took all her stuff and gave it to his wife, remember? So he sent like cloaks, coverings for saddles. It's like what did you send me? Like napkins? Like, this isn't clothes.
My man, why did you send 45 saddle blankets and 0 dresses? What is wrong with you?
So 1 month passed at Carlisle Castle with Letitia's dad. So she was there with her entourage, which includes Mary Seton from the Four Marys, young Willie from
Young
Lochleven,
Willie!
young Willie style. And so they would just kind of pass the time. At one point, her entourage played a football game against each other, and she was allowed to watch them. She was allowed to go out horseback riding, to go hunting hares. Oh, and this is where Mr. Latisse was like, oh no, she's like really good at horseback riding, and she could probably run away on a horse. So let's like let Elizabeth know that and maybe keep that in mind. So meanwhile, Mary Seton is there, and she's doing amazing work with wigs. So if you'll recall, Mary shaved her head. So Mary Seton, I love that she fled Scotland, no outfits, but all of the wigs. Like the first episode of Schitt's Creek when Moira is packing up all of her wigs. So Mary arrived with wigs and like no outfits. Anyway, so Mary Seton was just like styling the wigs. The wigs are all different hair colors. Letitia's dad wrote in one letter, like, I don't even know what color hair she has naturally every day. It's a new thing. Some great wig action happening. Mary Seton is just at this level of personal dresser that I find really delightful. Anyway, Mary kept, defending herself, and Letitia's dad went to Elizabeth and was like, maybe we should let her return to Scotland. Like, Mary's persuasiveness is considerable, but Letitia's dad seems like he was like kind of a pushover. So he went to Elizabeth and was like, hey, let's just let her go back to Scotland. And Elizabeth is like, no. Like, what are you? No.
One job, my guy. It was not that.
Yeah. So anyway, Elizabeth wrote to Mary being like, you can't go back to Scotland. Like, stop asking to go back to Scotland. Anyway, Mary wrote back to, like, these letters exist. This is how we know. So she wrote back to Elizabeth being like, come on. And Elizabeth did not change her mind. So anyway, but Elizabeth did agree to one thing Mary wanted, which was that she summoned Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart to London to testify about the whole Darnley murder situation as like a witness/accuser. At the same time, Mary was moved further, like where Carlisle Castle was like close-ish to the Scottish border. And so her supporters could come get her. She was good at riding a horse. So she was moved to somewhere a bit more into England, further away from Scotland. She's moved to Bolton Castle in Wensleydale in Yorkshire, the home of Lord Scrope. But Mr. Lettice is still like her babysitter. So this place was also more fortress than cozy home. Mr. Lettice said it had the highest walls of any house he had ever seen. So welcome to Prison Castle. Yeah, but again, she was allowed to go hunting and hawking. And while there, and presumably earlier, Letitia's dad started tutoring Mary in the English language. And you're thinking, like, she speaks the English language. She does not. She speaks French, Latin, and Scots. And Scots and English have similarities, but are not the same language.
So when she was writing to Elizabeth in these letters, was she writing French?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, French was kind of like, so she was in Scotland for 5 years, but being raised by her mother, who is French, surrounded by French servants. Then she went to France for like 15 years. So I
Yeah.
think French is kind of her first language.
French is
But the English
definitely
that
Yeah, I was wondering, like, in England, how many people spoke French, like, good enough to do the international business in French?
I don't know. I don't know. But I think Elizabeth was famously spoke every language. So
All of them.
like, I think Elizabeth, I think she did. I think she
Yeah.
was like very well educated. But this is interesting about the Scots. So again, like she went to, I think when she first went to Scotland, I think I said in the podcast, like she started like practicing her Scots, like a language that she knew when she was a little girl. So this is why people in England, so when she spoke English with a Scottish accent. So people in England described her as having a purring Scottish accent. So I always thought she would have a French accent when speaking English. But I think because she grew up in Scotland, speaking Scots and French, her English, anyway, she had a Scottish accent. This was like, so I need to like cross off my list of things that bother me. The fact that in the Saoirse Ronan movie, she uses a Scottish accent. In Elizabeth the Golden Age, Samantha Morton uses a Scottish accent. And in both cases, I was like, oh, that's so giving her a Scottish accent, she would have a French accent. In fact, no, people who met her, English people, called her, she had this delightful Scottish accent. So, exactly. It's the same as like in Rain when she got married in France. She was wearing a white dress, and I was like, oh, white wedding dresses. People don't have white.
Oh, no, but she actually did, though.
She actually did wear a white wedding dress. So I'm just like, okay, you know what? I have to, this is why it's good to learn things. But yeah, anyway, so she has this purring Scottish accent, which apparently added to her allure and made her seem exotic or something. Letitia's dad also began teaching her about Protestantism, maybe hoping that she would convert, because if she stopped being the Catholic queen, then maybe that would be safer for her. She wouldn't be a figurehead anymore. Mary was like, oh, in her cute Scottish accent, which I will not try to, if I do a Scottish accent, I'm going to sound like Scrooge McDuck. So I'm going to not try. But anyway, so in a secret letter, Mary wrote to the Spanish ambassador, Mary wrote that she would sooner die than change her Catholic faith, which has like been a consistent thing about her whole life, right? Anyway, but she's being nice to Letitia's dad and be like, oh, Protestantism, that's interesting. Mm-hmm.
And I
She
love
also made
seeing
friends.
her back to herself in this way, because like when she capitulated to Bothwell to have the Protestant ceremony, and I'm like, no, this is my skeevy Catholic bitch. She's back, and that's
Yeah,
satisfying.
no, exactly. Yes, very much. Like that was something that in that episode, which was, as we're recording it, that episode just came out. The Titsip Brigade are all still reeling from the Bothwell episode. But one of the things that was, I think, especially devastating in a series of devastating events was that it was a Protestant marriage and she was not allowed to go to Catholic Mass. Like her Catholic faith is so important to her in this really genuine way that's just, anyway. So
She's
I agree.
back.
I agree. I'm glad to see. Yes. Our Catholic queen is back. She also befriended Letitia's mom, Catherine Carey. So Catherine Carey was the daughter of Mary Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's sister. And there are some people who think that Mary Boleyn had been the mistress of Henry VIII before Anne Boleyn was the mistress of Henry VIII. And so there's some people who think that the children of Mary Boleyn are maybe Henry VIII's illegitimate children. So there's a theory that Catherine Carey might be actually Elizabeth's half-sister. Yeah, if Henry VIII is both of their dads. So the Lettice family is all, even if they're not, like Catherine Carey is the daughter of Elizabeth's aunt. So they're all really, really related, closely connected.
I'm also obsessed with now they're the Lettice family, named after the coolest person in it.
Lettice Peniston? So the Lettice family, so her mom, Catherine Carey, Mary befriends her because Mary is really, 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 really good at befriending people, as we're going to see, as we have seen, and as we will see over and over again. Her personal charisma and charm is really good. So this all led to Letitia's dad suggested his wife's nephew, George Carey, could maybe be a new potential husband for Mary. And this is something I hadn't thought about, but one of the other threats that Mary represents is like, who's she going to marry next? Like Bothwell is still, everyone's just kind of like, don't worry about him.
He's gone. We will never speak his name again. He's in Denmark.
He's in Denmark in a dungeon. We assume he's dead. So anyway, so potentially she could marry George Carey. Another potential husband for Mary, Queen of Scots, was Thomas Howard, the 4th Duke of Norfolk. Have you heard of him? I mean, those are just
The
6
fucking
names that,
The Howards are back.
yeah, the Howards are on the scene. So Thomas Howard, I'm not going to get into how he's related to other Howards. Just know there are a lot of them. And he is the most powerful, wealthy guy in England right now, Thomas Howard. And we're going to call him T-Dog. And T-Dog's sister was married to Lord Scrope. So the sister was maybe telling Mary, like, hey, I have this brother. His name is T-Dog. He's the wealthiest man in England, and he might be sympathetic to you and be a good new husband. So these connections are all happening. But technically, Mary was still married to Bothwell, although it was a Protestant ceremony, so I think she could probably be like, that didn't count. Anyway, she needed to get the Pope to say she was single. Like, she couldn't just be like, I declare that marriage doesn't count. Like, she had to get somebody officially saying that didn't happen. So she's just writing letters. Here's what she's doing. She's writing letters to everyone she can think of. So she's also spreading rumors. She's having her people, like, she couldn't leave the castle, but her entourage could. So they were just like spreading rumors around town, like telling other people. So she spread a rumor/lie that discussions were open with Philip of Spain, who was single again. This is still the same Philip who had been married to Mary I, and then he married Catherine de Medici's daughter, Elizabeth. He's like, it's still the same guy. I'm like, this surely is his son, also called Philip. No, same guy, same Philip. Anyway, so another potential marriage that she always has as an option is his insane son, Don Carlos. And then also the Archduke Charles of Austria. These are all kind of like the main Catholic royals in like continental Europe. So she was spreading these fake rumors, perhaps, to make Elizabeth and Cecil release her back to Scotland. I'm not sure why she thought that would happen, but anyway, this plan misfired.
I was going to say, that doesn't sound like that's going to work.
No. She doesn't have advisors.
Yeah.
She's just like thinking what she can. This just made them more determined to keep her trapped away. So they couldn't put her on trial because she was not Elizabeth's subject. She was a Scottish, like she was the queen. So instead of having a trial, like, she couldn't, there's not like a jury of your peers. It's like, okay, we'll get like Catherine de Medici, like Elizabeth. It's like other queens will be your jury. Like, no. So they decided to have an inquiry. So to have the inquiry, somebody had to accuse her of being involved in the Darnley murder. And that is part of where Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart comes in. And he didn't want to be the one to like accuse her in public in an English court of killing Darnley, because if Mary ended up back in Scotland, like if she was declared innocent, then that would fuck him over as being the one who accused her.
And he also never wants to be in the place where a thing is happening. He always wants to be like
exactly
25 feet away, making someone else do it for him.
Exactly. He's always just like, oh, well, that murder that I arranged happened. I was off to the north with my wife. Because, yeah, exactly. He doesn't sign the paperwork. Like, his whole thing has been like, stay out of these messy bits. Just like,
he's over there on the bench while the messy stuff is happening.
But he's the regent of Scotland now. So, like, you wanted this job. Like, you need to step up, my man. You can't just keep slip sliding away from like everything. But also secretly, Cecil was like, don't worry, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, like, we're working together. This is great. So I posted some pictures on Instagram because I was like, who's played Cecil in various films? So on Reign, it was a handsome, hot man. It was Tom Everett Scott, actually.
Because everyone on Reign is the sexiest person I've ever seen in my life.
Well, and also I like on Reign, they're like, okay, here's a historical character who had a beard. What if we get a man with stubble? And that's what we're going to have. Well, I always think of Cecil as from the Elizabeth movie with Cate Blanchett, or it's Richard Attenborough from Jurassic Park / Miracle on 34th Street, like literal Santa Claus looking person. But also this is where, so if I'm thinking of him as like the Jurassic Park guy, but it's also a bit of like the Wizard of Oz vibes, where he's just like running everything, but pretending like, oh, I'm just this nice Santa Claus man. Like, he knew that Mary was the biggest threat facing England at this time. If she was restored to power in Scotland, she could get more Catholics on her side. Like, she could overthrow Elizabeth. So he had to make sure that she was found guilty of murdering Darnley. So I mentioned the actors just so you can picture this, like this diabolical Santa Claus is how it, and when you see him in portraits, that is kind of what he looks like.
Kind of what he looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a co-founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. During her journey, Isla meets new friends, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and learns valuable life lessons with every quest, sword fight, and dragon ride. Positive and uplifting stories remind us all about the importance of kindness, friendship, honesty, and positivity. Join me and an all-star cast of actors including Liam Neeson, Emily Blunt, Kristen Bell, Chris Hemsworth, among many others, in welcoming the Search for the Silver Lining podcast to the Go Kid Go network by listening today. Look for the Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who's ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back. Okay, so remember... I'll remind you who these people are.
Thank you.
I know there's some people that you're going to remember, and there's some people because of their nicknames being memorable, and one of those people is coming up. But George Buchanan, he was in like part 2 of this series. He was an old man friend of Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, who Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart hired him when Mary first came to Scotland to be like her tutor. And he co-wrote some masks with David Rizzio.
Okay.
Anyway. So he's just kind of this old guy who appeared briefly. So he's always been loyal to Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart. He was also pals with Cecil because I guess just if you're an old man with a beard,
y'all are friends.
How many people of your generation are even still alive? I don't know. So he set to work writing a document. One might call it a pamphlet, claiming that Mary was this femme fatale. She was 100% behind the Darnley murder. She'd been having an affair with Bothwell since her son was born. Everyone was always really careful about that, to be like, James was legitimate, but Mary was a whore. But in that 1 month the son was conceived, she wasn't. So this pamphlet got into weird detail about her sexual habits with Bothwell, like literally saying that he was her backdoor lover. Like literally, he wrote she allowed Bothwell to abuse her body at the back door.
Bro.
Is a phrase he wrote in this pamphlet. And so he also recast Darnley from being this ineffectual, from being Darnley to being this saintly victim who is ill-treated by his cheating slut of a wife.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, it's just like fan fiction. It's like erotic fan fiction.
At least with fan fiction, you have like some loyalty to the original character. This is just like...
No, it's just fake. And so what he was...
This is an OC named Darnley. Come on, guys.
Yeah, so he wrote this document, I think just to be kind of like, hey, I was in Scotland and here's what I saw. Almost like can you use this in this inquiry? But there was no witness statements in it. There's no reports of like how he knew any of this stuff. So Kate Williams wrote in her book, there was no way Cecil would persuade Elizabeth, let alone a panel of judges, with this ludicrous piece of creative writing. So this is like Hollywood egg on Jimmy Stewart. He's like, I got you. Here's how, like, first of all, he's like, hey, guess what? The casket letters. And it's like, bro, this isn't anything. He's like, what about this erotic fan fiction? Can this be entered as evidence? Like, what do you think evidence means?
Well, how are they supposed to know? Evidence sometimes means draw an elaborate picture with a naked man in a garden. No one knows what evidence is.
Well, and I want to say, I don't know if Cecil appreciated that as much as we did either. Anyway, so speaking of the casket letters, so this erotic fanfiction, not going to work. So Cecil asked Hollywood Egg and Jimmy Stewart, like, do you have anything else to offer as evidence? And he was like, well, I do have these forged casket letters we made up a couple years ago. Do you want those? And Cecil was like, great. Like, let's use those. So he had copies made of the forged letters. Nobody ever checked the originals. It's bananas. Like, they're so obviously not actually proof. And so many historians have like looked at the letters, the minutia of them, the handwriting of them. It's like, what do these letters mean? And I'm like, bro, they're all lies.
Nothing. They mean nothing.
No, it's like when Mary, Queen of Scots, was trying to find sense in what the asshole lords were doing. And it's like, it's just dumb. It's just dumb. Like, just accept it's dumb. But the casket letters have been like, so many people have written so much about the casket letters. Like, it's just lies. Anyway, so the court of inquiry was being held. At this point, so Bothwell was in Denmark, being avenged by Skotafruen Anna Trondsen, a heroine for the ages. But so Hollywood Egg and Jimmy Stewart sent a message to Denmark demanding that Bothwell be sent back to Scotland, dead or alive, to maybe come and testify in the inquiry or something. Everyone's just like lying all the time. So Hollywood Egg and Jimmy Stewart sent a message to Denmark being like, we demand you send back Bothwell. But secretly, he got in the way of Bothwell coming back because he didn't want Bothwell to come back, because Bothwell would be like, no, I like wasn't having an affair with Mary. Like, this, I'm not her backdoor lover. Like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so Mary found out that the goddamn casket letters are back. She's just like, these fucking letters again. Are you fucking kidding me? She collapsed. Like, she physically collapsed. She wrote to Elizabeth begging for a face-to-face meeting. The letter included a poem that compared herself to a lost ship. But Elizabeth was like, can't stop this like runaway train of a kangaroo court. So like, let's go. Anyway, like, she was still not allowed to see the letters. She would not agree to the trial, like this inquiry. She was just like, I reject this wholeheartedly. This whole concept is dumb. Like, I didn't kill Darnley. Your only evidence is these letters. And also, I'm a queen. Queens can't be put on trial like regular humans. And Elizabeth was like, oh, no, you thought that we were going to make you go to the trial. No, you can't go to the trial because she's so persuasive and charismatic and sympathetic.
Yep.
She herself can't go. So someone is just going to go there to represent her. Like, everyone knew it was a fake trial. Like, I have to assume even Mary knew this was a fake trial, because the whole thing, what Elizabeth and Cecil wanted, was just to keep Hollywood Egg and Jimmy Stewart, or some other man who was easy to manipulate in Scotland, as the regent for her baby son. Mary was never going to be allowed back to Scotland to be queen again because that was too threatening. So just kind of wanted to keep Mary tucked away. She's still not allowed to see the casket letters. Her lawyers were not allowed to see the casket letters. She wasn't allowed to attend, as I said, so she couldn't hear the letters read out to contest them. And this is, again, Cecil, to his great credit. Like, here's the thing. Like, Cecil is an adversary worthy of Mary. Like, he's working against her, so I hate that. But I respect that he's so good. It's like in any story or movie, it's like when the villain is at this level, it forces the hero to really challenge themselves, and it's satisfying.
This is Batman and Joker levels of, like, they deserve each other. And that's and Cecil respects Mary in a way. He's like, I know how good this person is. Let me give her my A game. And I'm like, yes, okay. Thank you.
Exactly. He's the only person who's like, he knows how good she is at scheming. He knows she could switch outfits with someone else and climb out a window. He knows, like, she's capable of riding a horse for 5 hours. Like, he knows how persuasive she is. That's why they keep trying to let her not go. So he's like, she is 100% not showing up at this trial because she is so persuasive and sympathetic. Like, no, like he respects how good she is, which makes me respect him. He's not just like, oh, she's dumb. It's not like a John Knox thing where it's just like, oh, I hate her on principle because she's a woman.
No, he's
Cecil's
like, I
just
hate her because she's way too good at this, and she's gonna fuck up all my plans.
And Mary's just like, God damn it, it's like me in university. She's like, but I got away with this for so long. Someone actually noticed I'm smart. Damn it. I have to like become even better now, which she does. So if she had been there when the letters were read out, she could have disproved the letters by like pointing out factual errors in them because they were such obvious lies. So she wrote a little thing in her own defense, part of which said like her handwriting was easy to copy, which as we will learn later is very true. But we'll talk about that soon. That's when we get into some more letter stuff that Allison's going to talk about. Okay, so can you guess? It's a person I've already mentioned in this episode. Who is the head? Who could you imagine is the head of the inquiry?
It's a person we've already talked about.
Yes, with a nickname.
Is it going to be my favorite nickname of the show, WD-40?
No, it's not WD-40. No. Allison, it's T-Dog.
T-Dog? What a terrible person to put in charge of this inquiry.
T-Dog, the man who like wants to marry Mary, is in charge of the inquiry. Yes. So I think he's in charge of the inquiry because he's like the most wealthy, influential, like nobleman in England.
Isn't he like the only duke left in England at this point? Like,
yes, he's the only duke in England.
It's like, we need a duke. Get this guy.
T-Dog. So he's a widower. He's a Protestant. He's the most important aristocrat in England. He's also Elizabeth's second cousin on the Boleyn side. He was so like elevated. He considered William Cecil to be low-born.
What an asshole. Like, for fuck's sake. Yeah. I hate the Howards so much. I'm sorry. Just all of them except for Catherine Howard. I hate them all so much.
They're all pretty terrible. So he's been all up in this drama for years now. So anyway, Mary knew who T-Dog was because remember, she'd gotten close to his sister. And the sister was communicating with Scottish Machiavelli, who all of a sudden is 100% on Mary's side in this. Meanwhile, back in Scotland, Scottish Machiavelli passed on the message to Mary that if Mary married a great English aristocrat, Elizabeth might be won over to her side.
Why?
Not true. No.
The opposite of true, I think.
Yeah. So, and then also if she married a Protestant, then maybe the Scottish assholes would accept her back too.
No.
Unlikely. But so the other thing is that if Mary and T-Dog got married, that would directly threaten Elizabeth, because if they had a kid, that could be the next king of England, due to Mary being a queen and T-Dog's own impressive lineage. So T-Dog is in charge of the trial to find her guilty or innocent, / also trying to treasonously marry her is what's happening, because nothing in the story is ever straightforward. So Mary told her lawyers to begin divorce paperwork between her and Bothwell so she would be free to become T-Dog's wife. Elizabeth realized, like, wait a minute, T-Dog is the last person we should have in charge of this, so she appointed more judges to be in charge of this inquiry, including Cecil.
We love a court packing situation. She's like, no.
Yeah. Wait a minute. T-Dog, wait a minute. Okay, so T-Dog and Mary sending letters, courting each other. So he sent her a diamond and she replied, promising to wear it in secret until they could be together.
She's never met this man, right?
No. So she did add a caveat to the letter. She's like, but we can't marry unless Elizabeth gives us consent. But I don't know. Everyone in England was marrying without Elizabeth's consent at this time, is my understanding. Anyway, so Elizabeth obviously found out about this, not because of Mary. I feel like T-Dog is just sloppy. So she demanded T-Dog confess, like had he been trying to marry Mary and he lied. He's like, what? No, I would never. Anyway, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart was permitted to visit Elizabeth, and that hurt Mary a lot because all she's wanted for like 12 years has been a face-to-face with this woman who she thought is her like person, is her soulmate. And then Elizabeth meets Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart.
Of all people?
Anyway, Kate Williams writes, what was happening was a naked power grab by men of a woman's crown by her former friends and half-brother. Of course, plenty of bad male monarchs had lost their crowns, but Richard III, for example, had lost in battle a fair fight. Such was the structure of society that even a baby male was above her in terms of his right to rule, and she was easily pushed out. Which is all true. Just well said, Kate Williams. Another reason why Mary, like her lawyers were pushing to have her be allowed to go there to defend herself, but also like another risk is that she might throw the Scottish assholes under the bus. She might be like, they killed Darnley. I can prove it. So it's just like she's just too much of a wild card. They can't. Anyway, here's an update of a character who we've mentioned twice. Both times ended with his death, but I have more information, and it's your old friend French Paris.
French Paris!
I forget if I told you this, but I was trying to get just quantify some details about French Paris, and I went into a search engine and typed in French Paris, forgetting that's not a name. Guess what didn't come up? Stuff about this guy. Guess what did come up? Tourism information about French Paris. So previously I had mentioned French Paris was one of the people executed for Darnley's murder, which he was. But it wasn't until now that actually happened. So here's what French Paris did. After Mary was taken to Lochleven, French Paris fled to Denmark, which again, it's just like everyone is, it's like I don't know, is this the Las Vegas of its era? It's just like, that's the place. I don't know.
Yes.
Anyway, everyone's just always going to Denmark. Anyway, the asshole lords tracked him down and brought him back. So the thing about French Paris is he had been the messenger who brought who brought letters between Mary and Bothwell. So he could say, this is what they said, this is what they didn't say. French Paris had that information. So they're like, did you send love letters between them? And he was like, no, because they did not exchange love letters. But then he was tortured. And then he was like, yes, I did send love letters. So, but this proof, quote unquote, was so weak that when Cecil read the confession, he was like, don't even execute this guy. Like, this is clearly, clearly it's not true. Elizabeth wanted French Paris brought to London to be questioned about the role of other lords in the Darnley murder conspiracy and how much Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart knew about it. But the asshole lords in Scotland were like, ugh, like French Paris could reveal everything. And so that is when and why French Paris was hanged without trial almost immediately after his, quote, confession. On the scaffold, he shouted that he had never delivered those letters. So French Paris.
Poor guy.
I know. So he was, with his death, that was the last person who could have made, him and Bothwell were the only people who could have proven the casket letters were fake. And neither of them was available to show up. Anyway, so eventually Elizabeth was like, this trial is ridiculous. These letters are ridiculous. But also she didn't want to be blamed for what went wrong. And this is what we're going to get into Elizabeth in this episode and next episode. But her big thing, and this is to her credit, this is how she is still alive and the queen. She never says yes or no to anything. She's always just kind of it's very Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, but smart. She's just never wants to commit to any side of anything because she's never sure which side. She's just skating above everything all the time.
It reminds me more of the modern monarchy than it does kind of to keep your hands clean. It's I'm not taking a position. No one can be mad at me. Y'all are in charge of this, except she's really behind the scenes, pulling the strings and doing all of it. She's having that kind of Queen Elizabeth II facade on the front.
Yes, it's very Queen Elizabeth II, where it's just kind of
I am neutral and I am merely a figurehead. Wildly not true.
No, exactly. She was always at risk, and she knew she was always at risk of being usurped because she was a woman, because she was a queen, because there's these allegations that she was illegitimate. She had to always be playing everything so carefully. She could never really take a strong stance. But also she didn't want to take the blame for this. If Mary was executed or something, that could fall back on her somehow. So basically what she did.
Then she'd piss off the Pope, and she'd piss off Spain, and she'd piss off probably 1/3 of England, who would be like, you know what we should do? Maybe now is invasion rebellion. So,
yeah. Exactly. So if she let Mary back to Scotland, Mary would probably raise an army against her. But if she, had Mary executed or put in jail, then that would make Spain mad. So she was just kind of I'm just going to suspend the tribunal. And definitely, yeah. Anyway, so Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart was permitted to return to Scotland with a loan of £5,000 from Elizabeth, which was basically a bribe to make sure the Scottish Protestants remained indebted to England. Mary encouraged her followers to prevent him from returning home. She arranged for malicious rumors to be spread in Scotland that Elizabeth was planning to set up her own garrison of English people. That got more Catholics supporting Mary, but then Elizabeth retaliated by threatening to publicly reveal the contents of the erotic fan fiction, which would ruin Mary's reputation. At some point while this is all going on, I just read this in one source, and I want to believe it's true, but whatever. Allegedly, perhaps, Mary made an escape attempt from Bolton Castle, lowering herself from a window, mark that on your bingo card, with the help of Mary Seton, who, how many times has Mary Seton helped Mary lower herself out a window?
So many times. Mary Seton must have, 4 arms of a god at this point. She's just always lowering her out of a window.
I don't know. It's just Mary Seton, it's do the thing. Yeah, okay, plan, alpha, omega. Okay. So legend has it, Mary made her way on horseback as far as Leyburn, several miles away, before being recaptured. In the process, she mislaid her shawl, and so the cliff edge running westward from Leyburn is called the Shawl. So Mary Queen, like the country, like the entire island, the British Isles, should just be renamed like Mary Queen of Scots because every part of it is
She was
now
here.
named
She
after
looked
her.
at this.
Maybe she lost her shawl here. Okay, so she was found not guilty and also not innocent. And so she's caught in this holding pattern. So she's moved to a new castle with a new babysitter. This castle is Tutbury Castle in Staffordshire, which was even more isolated and further from the England-Scotland border, also more distant from England's northern Catholic regions and Mary's supporters. It was also derelict, drafty, damp, situated on a marsh. So it was just straight up gross. It was moist.
No one wants to be here.
It's damp and gross. So her new supervisor was George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury. He had recently taken a wife whose name is Bess of Hardwick.
Bess of Hardwick.
Bess of Hardwick is going to get her own episode later on. So we're going to talk about all this stuff, but just like, no, Bess of Hardwick is a very interesting person herself.
I just yell the names of cool people when they show up. I'm like, I don't know enough about her to tell the story, but I'm just like, I know Bess of Hardwick kicks ass.
Oh, no,
So,
she's great.
love
Yeah.
her.
She was I think she's the wealthiest woman in England not named Elizabeth the first.
Except her name was Bess, so she was named Elizabeth.
She was named Elizabeth. Okay, Elizabeth the first was not her name. Her name was Bess of Hardwick. And so she'd made her fortune through a series of good marriages and real estate, like kind of flipping houses sort of vibe.
HGTV motherfucker on cover.
Which I know you're really into that stuff. Yeah, so
I
she's just
am.
like building houses, flipping houses. So that's why they own this shitty castle, because I think they were going to
She's
like
gonna
flip
flip
it. Yeah. It's not like they live there because they were like extremely rich people with lots of properties, but it's just like this is their property that's the furthest away from the Catholic supporters. It's on a marsh. They're like, that one? Like, you want us to live there with her? This like castle in a swamp? Okay. So anyway, she and George Talbot had recently just gotten married later in life. They were both in their 40s. This was like they had been married before. They both had children from before. They owned several properties as a couple. Tutbury was the worst one. Obviously, I'm going to call her husband Mr. Bess of Hardwick because she's the main person in this relationship as far as I'm concerned. So they had been chosen because they were rich, because Mary had to be kept in her queenly style, and Elizabeth wasn't going to pay for that. Someone else had to. But also Elizabeth trusted them. So Bess of Hardwick, I believe I mentioned several seasons ago in the Jane Grey season, she was caught up in the Lady Catherine Grey secret sexy marriage situation in some capacity. And so she was out of favor with Elizabeth. So I think at this point, this was a way that it's like, Bess, you kind of owe me from like the Lady Catherine Grey situation. So
Do me a favor and you'll be back in my good books. And she's like, at this shitty house in the swamp, fine.
yeah, so being trusted was also key. They had to follow Elizabeth's directions and report everything back to her and to Cecil. Also, in terms of wealth, so Mr. Bess of Hardwick was the highest ranking peer in the realm after T-Dog. So he was wealthy and also influential and important. So keeping Mary in the state in which she was accustomed was really expensive. So it cost somewhere around £4,000 a year, which I put into a currency calculator, which is about $1.7 million in today, or 1.7 million pounds, which is about
like
$2.1 million.
Yeah.
Per year, just to like keep Mary living like she wanted to live. And these are details I did not know about how Mary was living, but I have these details now. So this money went to pay for her 50 servants, her 10 horses, each with groom, all the food required for her household, which was, she expected 2 courses at every meal, both with a selection of 16 dishes from which she could choose. She wanted her own wine along with bread, salad, and fruit. So just every meal, it's like, okay, here's your 16 options. And they had to, and she wouldn't eat them all. Like, you couldn't be like, here's what you get today.
That was surprising when you said it out loud. And then it clicked one more click in my brain. And I was like, I bet you Elizabeth was doing like 58 choices and 6 courses. Like, that's just how royalty was. And she's like, no, I'm still queen. You still better serve me the way that you would have served anybody else who's in power.
Yeah. So she was getting like, so this is why it's $2.1 million. Her ladies were allowed 9 dishes per course. Her secretaries got 6 or 7 and 8 for the gentlemen. She lived, like, her court was second only to Elizabeth's. Like, it was, like you just said, like, she's living like literally the queen that she is. And Bess and Mr. Bess are paying for it. So Mr. Bess kept asking Elizabeth to chip in more. Like, the English treasury covered a bit, but never enough to cover everything. It's kind of like when people are like, oh yeah, you send like $500 in child support every month. And it's like, but the child costs $5,000 a month. It's like, yeah, but you get this $500. So Mary refused to pay for anything herself because she was being kept against her will. Fair enough.
Yeah.
At Tutbury, the swamp mansion, she was allowed outside only under strict supervision. She was not allowed too far from the house for security concerns. But again, her entourage was allowed into town, and this is how she was secretly sending messages back and forth. She was closely guarded, watched by armed guards under her window who followed her closely when she went out riding or hunting. And I guess they all had to be paid as well. She was not permitted to exercise outside of the gates or to talk to people Mr. Best had not approved. Mr. Best had a son called Gilbert, who appears every now and then. He wrote records of things. And so Gilbert wrote, unless she could transform herself to a flea or a mouse, it was impossible that she should escape.
And like, give her time. She'll figure that out.
You know what? She will. So Mary and Bess struck up a friendship because Mary is I don't know if it's necessarily an extrovert thing, but I think she just liked being around people. She had always been around people, and she and Bess were just cool ladies who hung out. So Bess was like 15-ish years older, so like of an older generation, but Bess knew Elizabeth really well, and they bonded over their shared love of embroidery, and we'll talk about their embroidery in detail shortly. Mary, who has various health concerns, which we have discussed numerous times, and like anyone would living in this swamp house, she became sick from mold spores.
Just about no one lived in this house.
Yeah. So she had a pain in her side, likely a recurrence of the gastric ulcer situation from before. Mr. Bess also fell ill with gout. Like this house was like literally like destroying everybody's immune systems. So he asked permission to move Mary, and therefore himself and Bess, to one of the nicer homes. And Elizabeth agreed they could move it, but just briefly, while the house was what they call sweetened, which kind of means like renovated and kind of improved a bit. So they moved around and they would keep for the next little while, moving from house to house as the previous one was like sweetened. So, but this constant moving made people, it was harder for someone to try and rescue Mary because they never knew quite which house she was in and when. But every time they moved, it was this huge production to move her whole household, which was like furniture, tapestries.
Yeah.
Like, it's like I've heard about Taylor Swift, who has, like, when she goes on tour, she has various properties. And after the concert ends, she flies back to the closest one. So her things are always there. She's never staying in a hotel room. It's always like her things.
Mm-hmm.
So Mary wanted her things with her always. So she's just like a concert tour bus, just traveling around with her with all these things. This includes a chair she brought with her everywhere, which was her chair of state, which had an embroidered phoenix on it, and her motto, "In my end is my beginning."
Which is so fucking badass. Are you kidding me? It's so badass.
Oh yeah, no, like it's like if you kill me, I will burst into flames, come back, and be even stronger.
And then I will fuck you up because I'm Mary Queen of Scots. God, I love her so much.
Exactly. So by this point, which is like shortly after she's been staying with Bess and Mr. Best, she had around 240 staff members, all of whom Mr. Best was paying to feed 6 courses per meal. She's sent to Paris for the latest designs. She wanted to stay fashionable. I'm sure Mary Seton was on top of all this. She's reading their version of Vogue magazine, pamphlet version. She wanted the latest fashions, cloth and crowns, but also she was smuggling letters in these packages of fabric and things. Okay, so schemes. We're getting into some schemes. So a scheme came up created by a guy called Leonard Dacre, who was a cousin of Mr. Bess's. He lived nearby and he was a Catholic. He wanted to do a Lochleven patented switcheroo with Mary Seton and Mary, Queen of Scots, switching outfits. So Mary Seton would pretend to be her.
Literally just did that 8 months ago. Do not make me do that again.
So, but at this point, Mary, Queen of Scots, was like, no, because she didn't want to escape in that way. She's in a new era for herself. And she's like, I want to do things like officially. Her plan is like to wear Elizabeth down to be on her side is plan A. Plan B is to marry T-Dog. So she's like, me running away does not go with any of this.
Because where's she going to go?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the end game here? She'd have to leave England if she escaped, and she doesn't want to do that yet.
Yeah, she really wants to just make things work here. So she also, by the way, kept lots of little pets, including little dogs. And she was writing lots of letters to Philip in Spain, Catherine de Medici in France, her de Guise uncles in France, other de Guises elsewhere. But basically no one was answering or was really in the mood to help her, which honestly, like, early on in this, our friend of the podcast, Lanoa Johnson, was talking about the Deguises, and that was a side of this story I never really understood. But now I do. It's like they put her in this mess. They like when they got her to make the like heraldic arms, called her Queen of England. Like from that point on, Cecil was like this bitch. Like,
yeah, fuck you, Deguises. You made this mess. Get her out of it.
Yeah, exactly. But they were just like not answering her letters. Her divorce from Bothwell still not coming through, so she couldn't marry T-Dog yet, but T-Dog was busy moving ahead with his plans, getting other nobles to support this marriage, including Bobby Duds. Robert Dudley supported this match.
I bet he did, so he didn't have to end up in a weird threesome at Elizabeth's house.
So yeah, T-Dog is getting frustrated that Mary's divorce is not coming through. So he even contacted Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart to ask him to help speed things along, a wild card move.
What's he gonna do?
Anyway, meanwhile, back in Scotland, the assholes voted 40-9 against Mary returning, not that it was up to them, and they denied the dissolution of her marriage to Bothwell. Okay, and again, so I keep getting ahead of myself. This is when French Paris was killed.
R.I.P. French Paris.
For the fourth time, yes. In my defense, the books that I've read are mostly not written chronologically.
Or from the point of view of French Paris.
French, you know what? I've got so many ideas for historical fiction writers. Again, I know you have other projects, but other people, I think French Paris would be an interesting book to write. And you could call it French Paris, although that wouldn't be good for Google searching.
That's terrible SEO, but it
Okay. So, meanwhile, Elizabeth basically is pretending Mary doesn't exist and she's just living her life. She's Elizabeth, whatever. Things in Scotland seem to simmer down for now with Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart in charge, and a new man came on the scene who was named Sir Francis Walsingham.
My man! I've been waiting for him this whole time.
Okay, Allison, can you please explain who this is?
Sir Francis Walsingham is Elizabeth's very first official spy master, which was like his secret job title. He came in as, I believe he started as royal secretary. He might have worked his way up into that role. So like officially, he was the guy who kind of replaced Cecil in that like international relations management. But
Cecil's still on the scene. Cecil just transferred to a different job.
Yeah, he is promoted into a different job, I think, because he's now pushing like, so I think he's tired. And so Walsingham comes in and like, he's just the most head of the CIA kind of guy. Well, he's scheming on every cylinder. It's delightful.
And you know a lot about him because you're a fan in general, but also because he is a character in your novel, A Tip for the Hangman.
He is. So I am very emotionally attached to this man.
And a couple of notable things about him. He has a daughter who he named after himself, Frances.
Which legend. That's not quite what the Vulgar History Bingo card says, but the spirit of it is there. Daughter named after the Queen, Frances Walsingham. Love it.
Yeah. So Walsingham enters the chat. So he's, again, I did not realize that I've watched the Kate Blanchett Elizabeth movie like once 20 years ago, but somehow that's just my understanding of many of the characters is based on that movie. And so in that, Geoffrey Rush plays Walsingham. So I just picture Geoffrey Rush.
I picture him as Mark Rylance from Wolf Hall as Thomas Cromwell. They're very similar kinds of characters, which you just come in here quietly in the shadows, smarter than everybody else, kind of manipulating things behind the scenes. To be clear, those are two different people, but they have the same energy.
Absolutely. So he was bringing in what I wrote as the Kingsman Tudor era vibes.
Yes.
Which would be a good movie when this writer's strike ends. Someone should write that movie. So he was great at spy shit, and he trained and recruited amazing spies. And his spies provided intel that T-Dog and Mary had talked about betrothal. So Mary and T-Dog, okay, Alison, I sent you some pictures. There's a picture, I don't know how much you can see. It's the first one. It's like a very cluttered image. Can you see that in our chat?
Okay.
Can you decipher anything in it? Can you describe any of what you're seeing?
It looks like I'm looking at two trees coming out of a magic beanstalk, and there's a little palace in the middle going up into the clouds, and there might be pears in the trees, and I have no idea what I'm looking at.
It's also, to be fair, very faded because it is an embroidery made by Mary Queen of Scots, like hundreds of years ago. I'm going to describe to you. This is treason embroidery.
Okay. I just see the
So-
trees. Show me the treason.
Treason. I was going to be like, where's Waldo? It's about the treason. But I'll explain it to you. And this is, again, Claire Hunter's book, Embroidering the Truth, explains this really, really. She knows all the symbolism. Anyway, so she sent this cushion.
We love
This
a
is
treason cushion. God.
treason cushion. So it depicts, if you can see, in the middle, that's a hand. That's a hand reaching down from the sky.
Oh, okay. Holding like a
With,
sickle?
but it's got like a lace cuff on the hand.
Uh-huh.
So it's holding a pruning knife. So the pruning knife is cutting out the dead growth of an old vine to allow a younger, fertile vine to flourish and bear fruit.
I see the treason, Anne.
Treason embroidery. Just to make it even more treasoningly obvious, she also included several symbols, including, where is it? On here somewhere, there's a stag, which is the symbol of Catholic victory over non-believers. There's also a butterfly. The butterfly is over on the tree on the right, next to it. The butterfly is a symbol of resurrection. And in case this is still too subtle for T-Dog, who, bless, it probably was. She also included Latin text, which says in translation, virtue flourishes by wounding.
Oh, shit, Mary.
So this is Mary's treason cushion.
Jesus Christ, it's so much worse than I thought.
Do you see over, and listeners, I'm going to share this image. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. This is at the V&A Museum in London. But also I'll post it on Instagram. But Allison, on the left, next to the left tree, do you see there's sort of like a circle with a little up and down? Sort of like an M.
It's got 2 X's in it.
Yeah, that's like her signature that she puts on her embroidery. That's her signature thing. So that's just this was done by me.
This is my treason.
Yeah. So
the more I look at this, the more it's like that hand coming down with the knife is just, it's got the biggest Monty Python energy, and I'm obsessed with it now that I can see what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. As I mentioned, T-Dog wrote to Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, being like, guess who's going to marry your half-sister? It's me, T-Dog. Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart obviously told Cecil, who he was working for, who told Elizabeth. Elizabeth freaked out. Her lover, her pal, Bobby Duds, tried to calm her down with his own symbolic art-based gift.
Yes. Did he embroider a pillow?
No, but he presented her, I think he commissioned this. So it's a jewel which depicted Elizabeth on the throne with Mary chained to one of its legs and France and Spain drowning under waves.
Oh my God, man, that's too much.
It's do you understand what symbolism means, Bobby Duds?
That's not a symbol.
No, that's not subtext. So anyway, Mary was caught. Her room was searched by men with pistols. Her armed guard was doubled. And some of her little fun things she could do were taken away, but not embroidery. Anyway, Elizabeth was shocked that Bobby Duds had supported the T-Dog plan. T-Dog thrown into the Tower of London. Mary's entourage size was decreased. She was forbid to write to anyone, to the extent that when Mary Seton fell ill, and Mary Seton's mom wrote to Mary asking, could Mary Seton come back to Scotland, please? Mary Seton's mother was thrown in prison for writing to a captive.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, Mary Seton remained with Mary. Anyway, so she was her status, Mary was not less she's our guest in England. And we're just kind of she's a dangerous conspirator / prisoner. So then, we're in 1569. Mary has been in England for a year and a half. So maybe not even that. So a thing happened called the Northern Rebellion / the Rising of the North. So this is just Northern English earls loyal to the Catholic cause / to Mary went into Catholic churches or into Protestant churches and started ripping up prayer books sort of vibes. Mary knew that this was happening because she as much as Walsingham had spies everywhere, Mary, and you write this very well in your book, Allison, she always knows what's happening. Even though she can't leave this house, she has people everywhere. So she's on the ball constantly.
She's at most half a step behind, and then she's just waiting for the mail to get there, and then she's going to know everything.
So Mary refused to support this or to be involved in it because she's still hoping that Elizabeth would come through for her and she wouldn't need to be rescued by Catholics. Anyway, so the goal of these earls was to have Mary and T-Dog usurp the crown from Elizabeth. This, of course, did not work. Elizabeth sent 15,000 men north. The rebels were hunted down. 800 were executed. Gruesomely, very gruesomely, like dragged through the streets, vivisected, to the point that people are like, oh, Elizabeth, like maybe not. The vibes are a bit like her older sister, Bloody Mary the First, and it's kind of like, this is a bit much.
We didn't love this last time this happened.
No. So the Pope heard about this. He officially excommunicated Elizabeth, and he declared that Mary should be Queen of England in her place.
Which, yikes for Mary. She's like, that is not what I requested. You have just made my life so much worse right now.
But also yikes for Elizabeth, because this basically meant any attempt to push Elizabeth off the throne and put Mary in her place was like, I'm doing what the Pope said. It's like the Pope signed off on assassinations.
It's a real reverse crusade. Like,
yeah,
this is your Pope ordered, go kill this person because God has told you to do it. I mean, not a reverse crusade. That's just what a crusade is.
It's like a one-person crusade. It's like, go not kill this like group of people. It's like, kill this one person.
It's one individual person. Yeah.
So anyone, like any rebel, from a noble leading an army to a servant who poisoned her soup, would be engaged in what the Pope called glorious work. So he was kind of like calling for Catholics to kill Elizabeth.
So you can imagine, no one is thrilled by this, but
no,
my boy Walsingham was like, I have so much work to do. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the Pope has just ordered every random Catholic in the world to try to assassinate the person I am supposed to protect. I do not have enough spies for this business.
Have you seen any of the John Wick movies?
No.
Okay, this happens in like 2 or 3 of the John Wick movies. There's a part where like this call goes out. It's just like, hey, there's a bounty on John Wick's head, $7 billion. And then suddenly every assassin in the world is going after him simultaneously. It's like, wait, so everyone in Paris is an assassin and has like everyone in this cafe is an assassin? They all just got this beeper on their pager? Okay.
Exactly.
So it's like that.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly that. So except again, Tudor era. So Elizabeth demanded Mary be relocated somewhere even more obscure. So she was sent to Coventry Castle. But this, again, okay, so I don't know a lot about castles in England, but it seems like there's an awful lot of abandoned ones.
Yeah, because they're incredibly hard to maintain. Like, they made a lot of sense when you were defending yourself against an army of people from Wessex trying to come and storm your battlements. But now that, like, you're not actively engaged in a civil war with armies, when you're fighting with like people not at home, it's incredibly expensive and they're not comfortable. They're drafty, they're cold. No one wants to be there. You want to be in your nice little manor house where you can hang your walls with tapestries and get cozy and go to court on the weekends. Like, no one wants a castle. That's why you can still buy an old abandoned castle for like not that much money, because they are terrible to live in.
Well, it's interesting because when I look up the castles that people go to in this story to be like, oh, is this a tourist destination now? Like some of them are just ruins and some of them like are hotels now or whatever. But even in Mary's time, like there was abandoned castles. There's just like abandoned castles. So she was sent to, so I think Elizabeth just has some map. Maybe it's like from 200 years ago. She's like, that castle. So go to that castle, but it was abandoned. No one can stay there. So Mary ended up staying at a nearby inn, which is like a room above a pub vibes.
Which is like ideal place to escape from if you want to marry Queen of Scots.
Yeah, Philippa Gregory wrote a book that takes place during this weekend. And she imagines that what if Mr. Bess of Hardwick was in love with Mary? And what happened this weekend at this pub is, honestly, Philippa Gregory, like her story concepts are great.
The only problem with that concept is if I was married to Bess of Hardwick, there's no way you would cheat on Bess of Hardwick. Like that, I cannot suspend my disbelief that far.
No, exactly. So they're staying in this inn. So the Philippa Gregory book is called The Other Queen. So while staying in Coventry, so Mary got a new babysitter who went to a guy called Henry Hastings, the 3rd Earl of Huntingdon. Triple H is what I call him. And he was a distant claimant to the throne of England. So he was jealous that Mary had supporters and he did not have supporters. You remember when Elizabeth got smallpox that time and it's like, oh no, is she going to die? Who's going to be the heir? Like Triple H was like, this is my time. I'm going to be king.
Spoiler,
king,
it was not his time.
No. Anyway, and this made Elizabeth mistrust him because he was like way too excited when she got smallpox that time. Anyway, so under his care, Mary was moved from the like room above the pub to St. Mary's Guildhall into a room that is now called Mary Queen of Scots' room. So Triple H was also brother-in-law to Bobby Duds, being married to his sister. So he wrote to Bobby Dudds being like, what if I, Triple H, marry Mary and help her escape? So everyone is just all up. Everyone is related to each other and everyone is just scheming ineffectually. Walsingham has a lot to do, really.
This is some asshole Scottish lords level scheming, I have to say. Like, this is not high quality scheming. There is
No, not
bad
at all.
scheming in England as well.
Exactly. You know what? Yes, that's important to say. It's not like people in Scotland couldn't scheme well and people in England could scheme well. It's just there's good and bad in both places.
There are a couple really, really good English schemers, and then Mary's the really good Scottish schemer, and then there's a bunch of dummies all over.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. And yes. We will talk about many of them. So anyway, but Mary was just like, no, I'm not going to run off with Triple H. Like, she's like, my plan is to marry T-Dog and not upset Elizabeth and like not upset Elizabeth and just get on with it. Anyway, this is where I had to, these episodes are so long, but you're going to want to know this. So one of the guys, when they did the Northern Rebellion, was sent off to be a prisoner at Lochleven Castle under the care of WD-40.
WD-40, my man! A Douglas!
Which I didn't realize this. So after Mary had escaped from Lochleven, WD-40, in fact, tried to kill himself.
Oh, shit.
Out of like shame and disgrace. Was not successful, which I mean, whatever. There's lots of details. But he tried to stab himself with a dagger. So I don't know if it's just like, oh, I missed. Well, that's my suicide attempt. Like,
yeah. Oh, man, poor guy. I feel bad for him. He was in a bad spot.
He was, I mean, to be the guy who was watching Mary Queen of Scots when she escaped by walking out the front door that was left unlocked.
Man, she got in a boat and she rowed away.
Yeah. So I just wanted to let you know what WD-40 was up to.
I'm glad he's okay.
Anyway, so in response to the Northern Rebellion and all this stuff, so there was, I don't know if it's acts or laws or whatever, but a rule was made in England by Cecil and Walsingham, making it high treason and thus punishable by death to imagine the death of Elizabeth.
It's one of my favorite pieces of legislation in history.
You can't even think it. Thought crime.
And we'll know because we're Cecil and Walsingham. We're paying attention.
They would. So it's high treason to publish, write, or speak that she was not the lawful monarch. It was treason to guess how long she might live, to do her horoscope.
This is when we get into her weird astrologist, John Dee, which is a separate conversation, but like he was the only person who could do her horoscopes because everything else was death.
You did a whole Dirtbags newsletter about John Dee.
He's such a weirdo. He thought he could speak to angels, and he like had a weird free love situation with his wife who was not into it.
I want to mention something just to the listeners. I know that there's lots of listeners, and I know like some of them follow me on Instagram. But just this week, I discovered there is this Spanish/British miniseries called Reinas, or in English, Queens, the Virgin and the Martyr. And it's from a couple years ago, and it's a Spanish language miniseries about Elizabeth and Mary, and it looks super sexy, and it includes more Spanish characters than you would imagine. But you know what? Spain was not uninvolved in this. They have a very sexy Philip II actor.
Ooh, surprising.
I haven't watched it. You can watch it on Tubi, which is a streaming service. Anyway, this is the first thing I've seen, like, when just looking at the character list, John Dee is in this. So I'm like, oh my God, John Dee, he's never in things.
I know, and he's so weird. Now I'm going to have to watch this. I'm excited.
I was excited about John Dee being in it, but the reason I found it was because it's the only on-screen version of Skotafruan Anna Thronson.
Which is insane because she's the best. Good
I know.
for her.
Philippa Gregory, write a book about her, is my request. So yeah, so there's this thought crime. Basically, no one can talk or even think that Elizabeth shouldn't be the queen and who would be her heir.
And it's think about that she might die ever for any reason. So the official legal statement is Queen Elizabeth will live forever. And if you disagree, we're going to kill you, which is just wild.
Yeah. Anyway, so Mary is brought back to the swamp castle of Tutbury. She has now been in effectively house arrest for 2 years. But then, good news. Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart was assassinated.
Yay!
I just think that's good news. Good news to her, to us, to everybody. Here's what happened. And this really illustrates something that I was thinking about this week, which is like Mary was the scapegoat. Like when she went to Scotland, they were just, oh, she's a woman and she's Catholic, so we hate her. It's like if she'd been a woman Protestant, they would have hated her. If she'd been a man and Protestant, she wouldn't have gotten along because these guys are just chaotic. Like Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart worked so hard to become regent. He served as regent for like 2 years and then was assassinated because I was thinking of it as like a toxic family dynamic where you've got like the scapegoat. If that person leaves the family, it's not like the people left now get along. So Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart became the new Mary. Like people just started hating him. So it's just beautiful.
Karma. Lovely.
It's beautiful to me. So anyway, so what happened is he was walking through the streets of Edinburgh when JFK vibes, an assassin fired through a window and shot him to death.
Those people of Edinburgh don't fuck around.
So you remember how Darnley, that was the first time gunpowder had ever been used in a non-war situation. This is the first gunshot assassination in the history of like everything.
Wow.
It's the first time a political figure had been assassinated with a gun. Like Elizabeth, like Catherine de Medici, everybody was just like, wait, what? Like this could happen? So yeah, so they all started getting more guards. They started being like maybe not so close to the public. Like, yeah, so Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart. The assassin was never found, but was assumed to be somebody from the Hamilton family, who I will remind you, their whole deal was like, when there's a baby king of Scotland, we are the regents of that baby.
Fuck you, man.
Mad about it.
A Hamilton.
So I just love that they were just mad that they couldn't be, they're like, our whole deal is we're the regents to the baby kings of Scotland. How dare you, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart, dare to be regent to the baby king of Scotland. Like for 5 generations, a Hamilton has been. Anyway, so when I say the assassin was never found, I mean the assassin was never officially like caught, but everyone knew who it was. To the sense that Mary knew who it was and provided a pension to the assassin in appreciation for doing such a good thing.
Oh my gosh, she's so fucking petty.
Like, thank you for your service. So Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart is dead, not R.I.P. And I just like the delicious stupidity of he worked so hard to get Mary out of there. And then he couldn't even reign. Like she was there for what, 6-7 years? He was regent for like 2-ish years. And then he was like, she did so much better than him. He worked so hard to get that job. And then he was assassinated because he couldn't handle his shit.
She did so much better than him while he was actively working to like take the knees out from under her. He couldn't even thwart her. Okay. And then he couldn't hold it for like a year.
Yeah. It's just, anyway. So Elizabeth was like, okay, like Scotland was kind of like their little like sub kingdom that they sort of were in charge of. Because baby James is still a little kid that needs to be a regent. So she's like, okay, who can be the new puppet who will do what I says? And she chose Lennox, who's Darnley's dad, to be the next regent. He did not last long. He was, in fact, also assassinated. And then a guy called the Earl of Mar took over, who had been baby BJ's guardian for a while. Like the assholes, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows. It's not like Mary left and everything was cool in Scotland. It's like everything is still chaos in Scotland. It was like the least chaos when she was there, actually.
It only got worse.
Yeah. So like all these guys we talked about last time who are all scheming, just one after another, keep being the regent, get assassinated. Be the regent, get assassinated. Anyway, so Mary had so many rules. She couldn't go outside and exercise and stuff. So it's like, what can she do? Embroidery. As described by Claire Hunter in her excellent book. Many of her embroideries, this is describing Mary's embroideries. I've sent several to you, Allison, to look at, and we can discuss them. So many of Mary's embroideries are unsettling, containing images of destruction and violence. A sword with a curved blade slides through a knotted rope. A vine is watered with wine to make it die. A snake falls into a fire of sticks. A leopard holds a hedgehog in its mouth, accompanied with the motto, "It presses on it and it sticks."
Yeah.
There is a tree being cut down by a scythe, vines being pruned, a field growing spears and helmets instead of corn. Many of Mary's embroideries are filled with images of destruction: splintered ship masts, torn sails, felled trees, broken ropes, heaps of feathers from a dead bird.
So how's our girl doing, Anna?
It's like, I just know from movies and things, when, children go to therapy, it's like, draw a picture of your family. And you're like, oh no.
Oh, no.
So Mary is letting out her feelings in these quite graphic embroideries. One of her best-known embroideries is from this period, which is currently on display at Holyrood House, is called "A Cat." Allison, can you please describe this?
It's a perfect embroidery. It's it is a cat with mostly chest, really chest forward kind of a cat, staring, I think, at a dead mouse on a parquet floor. And there's a little blue banner in the side that just says a cat, CATTE, and I love it.
And
This is
Mary's little motto is back there. They're like the little M in the
yes, this
circle.
is my cat, Mary Queen of Scots.
It's very much like people, I don't know, when I was in junior high, people would like make a little thing of their initials and you'd like draw it with a marker on the bathroom stall or whatever. It's just kind of like Mary. So I do want to reveal to everybody that I have made merch inspired by this embroidery. Allison, you have seen the merch.
It is top 10 merch of any cultural artifact of all time. It is spectacular.
This is like, I preemptively got, so Jan Jupiter, who I've collaborated with several times on merch, who is this amazing artist from the Netherlands who really gets the vibe. I was like, here's Mary Queen of Scots' embroidery. Could you redo this? But instead of this orange cat, could you make it be my cat, Hepburn, who is tortoiseshell? And we were going back and forth. And so Mary's embroidery, it says a cat, and then it's kind of Hepburn, but drawn in this style. And then I was like, ugh, like, can you make the cat look happier?
This cat doesn't look thrilled.
No. Mary's cat looks pretty upset. And then in Mary's, the mouse is just like this lump. So if like, okay, so obviously the orange cat is Elizabeth, right? Like it's Elizabeth having mastery. The mouse is Mary. And the mouse is just this lump. Like it's not well defined. It's just sort of like how she perhaps sees herself is just kind of this like helpless blob. So in my merch, I was like, can you make the mouse also be happy? So the mouse is just like laying back with like its hands behind its head, legs crossed, just being like this happy mouse with Hepburn. And instead of the Mary sigil, there's just cute little hearts drawn all over. Anyway, you can get this merch on a t-shirt, on a sticker, on a magnet, on a pin. What I've ordered for myself on a pillow.
Treason pillow.
So I can have my own treason pillow. But because Mary, yeah, she made this embroidery. She put it on a pillow. Anyway, you can get that at vulgarhistory.com/store. The cat, when I first started doing this season, like even before I started, I asked on my Instagram stories, I'm like, what do you know about Mary? What are you excited to hear about? And someone said, can you talk about her weird cat embroidery? And I was like, oh, we're going to talk about her cat embroidery. It's like she invented memes. Like
it's so good.
It's so good, but also just like psychologically in terms of like the devastation of so many of her embroideries. The cat is great.
They're all extremely upsetting, but a lot of them are also like really cute. So
yeah, what's sort of like the art of, I don't know, like Frida Kahlo or somebody where it's like you're going through some shit. You can see that in the art, but also it's charming.
Like Anne also sent me one that's two frogs, and it says in the same kind of banner lettering, a frog, FROGGE. And it's just two little frogs, and one of them's got his mouth open like he's seeing something shocking. And I'm gonna get that printed on a t-shirt because it's great.
They're so cute. I'm going to put all these pictures. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes because a lot of these are at the V&A Museum in London. A lot of these. She also did one of the Phoenix. So you've got the Phoenix. I'm just going through the ones I sent you, Allison.
The
like
Phoenix
on the pyre. Yeah. And then if the next one, there's like 6 altogether. There's an unicorn.
Classic Scottish sigil. We love it.
The next one is a rhinoceros.
Mary,
which is like,
Queen of Scots, has never seen a rhinoceros. Let me clarify for the listeners at home. I am not sure if this animal can walk or swim or is a dragon.
The rhinoceros kind of looks like a sideways seahorse mixed with a crocodile. Yeah, the rhinoceros. She has a tiger, a dolphin, but she made a pun. She used the word that means dauphin, like her first husband, who was the Dauphin of France. She made the dolphin.
And he did the little crown at the bottom there.
Yeah. And then the one, do you like this? Do you recognize this one? A bird of America? Have you seen things like that where you live?
No, but I love it. It's kind of like a toucan, pelican, falcon with one big old staring eye. It's very weird to me to see Mary Queen of Scots write the word America. Like that doesn't overlap in my brain as things that existed at the same time. So
yeah,
that's wild.
Her embroidery is amazing. I'm really I'm going to do I'm talking about this in depth with Claire Hunter in a later episode.
Can you please ask Claire about the rhinoceros because I need it.
It's lovely. So the embroideries are incredible. You can see some of them at Holyrood House. You can see some of them at Hardwick Hall, which is a house that Bess of Hardwick built later on. Mary never stayed there, but because Bess of Hardwick was like a really, really talented embroiderer. Mary's are have got a lot of vibe to them, but her stitchery is not perfect. Bess of Hardwick is so good at it. Anyway, so just they're sitting around, they're stitching. This is what she's doing. Anyway, eventually she was moved out of the swamp house to Chatsworth House, and T-Dog was freed from the Tower of London after other nobles pressured Elizabeth to free him.
A mistake.
Yes. So William Cecil at one point came to visit Mary in person. Can you imagine? This is like, there's some classic like theater plays that are just like imagining a meeting between two. I want to play, maybe it exists. Mary and William Cecil, just do that as a two-hander play. Like,
that'd be so good.
It'd be so good. It'd be so good. You get like Jessica Chastain, Oscar Isaac. I just say their names because they just did a thing together.
I'm
But,
sorry,
like,
Oscar Isaac as William Cecil is inspired casting. I can't stop thinking.
Thank you.
That
Well, and I think I can see Jessica Chastain as Mary as well.
Yeah.
Maybe just because she's red hair.
I would do Jodie Comer as Mary. I think that'd be fun.
Ooh, Jodie Comer as Mary. Yes. So good. So by the fall, Mary's health getting worse. Never good. She's living in a swamp. She can't exercise, and that's been a thing that's always been helpful for her psychologically, but also physically, I think. She was moved to a different, like, Bess and Mr. Bess own a lot of properties, so they moved to their other place, Sheffield Castle. So at this point, she had lots of pain and inflammation on her left side, again, the gastric ulcer thing. She was basically bed-bound. She didn't sleep for 12 days. Never good for anybody. Fresh air and exercise were suggested, but Mr. Bess was under strict instructions not to let her go outside. But even so, she's like struggling, obviously, health-wise, but she's writing letters to everybody. Elizabeth, Cecil, she even wrote to Bobby Duds. She's just like, let's get this figured out. And then goddamn T-Dog got involved in a little thing called the Ridolfi plot.
Oh, T-Dog.
So, Ridolfi. Do you know, I know you know the Babington plot. That comes later. Do you know much about the Ridolfi plot?
I know the basic shape of it, but I think you will tell a better story and I will pop in as we go.
Please pop in as we go. So there was a Florentine Catholic banker. I find this interesting because there's that whole thing about like Christians can't be bankers, and that's why like only Jewish people are bankers. But this is a Catholic banker named Roberto Ridolfi, a Florentine, a small, delectable cookie of a person. So he'd been living in, okay, the other thing that's crucial to me to understand, it's like how in Scotland, everyone's like, no, now this person supports Mary. Now they support Jimmy Stewart. Like everyone's flip-flopping, and everyone in England also is. And a lot of them are double agents. And I don't think they even know at times who they work for, really. So Roberto Ridolfi, now I'm just thinking of the guy from Sweeney Todd.
The king of the barber of kings. Buongiorno, good
the banker of kings. So he had been living in London for many years. He was pals with William Cecil. Was he working with him? Was he a double agent? Both simultaneously? No one knows.
Yeah, because he's a very odd figure because like Italians almost universally Catholics at this period, and Catholics almost universally enemies of Elizabeth. But now he's hanging out with like her right-hand man, being friends, which is weird. And then the whole business of it unfolds. Like he's a real wild card of a guy, and I'd love to know his whole deal.
I like the mysteriousness of him. Like if a later reveal was like in a Lola Montez way, it's like actually he's from Ireland. He's not even Italian. He just put on an accent and learned to dance.
Wouldn't be surprised even in the slightest. Because Roberto, like that's such a spooky name. I love him.
So he had been he's in a Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart / like way, he'd been vaguely involved with the Northern Rebellion, but no charges were brought against him, perhaps because he was pals with Cecil and maybe he was double dealing, or maybe he agreed to a deal with Cecil at that time. There's a part of the story where Ridolfi was taken to Walsingham's house for interrogation, where it's like, which side is he on? No one really knows.
Yeah, because if he's friends with Cecil, but Walsingham is like, I don't trust your friend. Like, 100% there's something messy.
Yeah, he's never sent to jail despite being involved in this rebellion for which numerous people were publicly vivisected. So anyway, his job as a banker was the perfect cover story to crisscross continental Europe in search of sponsors for a plan to unseat Elizabeth and put Mary on the throne as the Queen of England. This lined up nicely with Mary and T-Dog's plan, but they needed some huge investors to make this happen. Because they needed an army. They needed to fund an army of Catholics, right? They needed to get a country like Spain.
Yeah, that's the thing that I feel like we don't ever talk about when we're talking about treason is how expensive it is to do it. Like, you can't just go like, I'm going to walk into London and kill Elizabeth and I'm queen now and no one will fight me on that. Like, you need an army, and to get an army, you need money to pay your soldiers and to get your mercenaries, and you need money to feed them and you need money to house them. And it's like, of course, only queens and noblemen ever lead a rebellion. No one else can afford to do it.
And that's part of why this whole thing, like, there's so many letters, there's so much back and forth, because it's not just like, hey, these like 6 guys are going to come rescue Mary. It's like, and then what? Like, you need. But the whole thing with Spain and with Rome is they're all like, okay, well, if England's Catholics successfully mount a rebellion, we will then bring our soldiers over. But England's Catholics have to do that first. But England's Catholics, just having seen a bunch of themselves be murdered, now that it's illegal to talk about Elizabeth, they're like, we're not going to do that unless we know Spain is coming. Or Spain is like, we're not going to come. So it's like,
right, because if Spain or Rome comes in, that's a foreign invasion provocation for a war. Like, if you make the first move, you don't want to move the first move. You want to be like, oh, these people, I'm supporting them, but this is a homegrown thing. I'm not coming in and staging a religious coup, which is like gonna bite you in the butt with probably every other Protestant country in Europe, which is increasingly more of them.
So Rodolphi's job, this is either what he's doing or what he's pretending to be doing to catch people. But basically, he just needed to get, at this point, a bunch of English Catholics to start another rebellion so that the other countries could come in and not be the aggressors. So the whole thing I've
His job
discovered
was to get them to do it and then tell Elizabeth that they were doing it so that they could get caught, because who knows, this man is slippery.
Exactly. So the whole thing was discovered in sort of parts. So letters are being exchanged. So there's a guy called John Leslie, a bishop who had been Mary's go-between. I think he was, God, there's so much spy shit, whatever. I think he was going between London, like where Mary was, and London, like, because she's in this, like, out in the swamp or whatever. Anyway, so a letter from Rodolphi to John Leslie, Mary's kind of guy, was intercepted by Walsingham. This is how they linked Mary to Rodolphi. Then a coded letter from Mary, and we're going to talk about the codes in the next episode extensively. But a coded letter from Mary was discovered in T-Dog's house under his doormat.
Like, where you hide your house key when your plant waterer is coming? Come on.
I think T-Dog, like, a basic thing about spy shit is, like, you read the letter, then you burn it. You don't just, like, what do you...
Burn
T-Dog.
after reading. That's what they named the movie. Come on, man.
Yeah. So this further linked her to the conspiracy. T-Dog was found to have funded Scottish Mary supporters. Mary, like, all that Mary was known to have done was to have borrowed money from Rodolphi. We don't know if she was involved. Like, the only thing that links her to Rodolphi is, like, he was a banker and she got some money from him, which he might have contacted her to do that just to make her look guilty. Like, Rodolphi is real shady.
Yeah.
So anyway, so T-Dog was arrested, sent back to the Tower of London. Leslie, the bishop, was apprehended, tortured, and he, under torture, this is like, you know, I feel like this is what I would do under torture as well, where it's like, what do you want me to say? Do you want me to say more? Like, he just said more than was even true. He was like, Mary was behind... No, he was like, Mary was behind the rebellion where they ripped up the Bibles. The Pope is funding everything. A foreign invasion was planned. Mary killed Darnley. She also killed her first husband, Francis. She tried to murder Bothwell. She's planning to kill T-Dog. Like,
do you want more? What else can I tell you?
But crucially, he spilled the beans about the treason cushion.
Treason cushion. I love that he was so desperate to get at the top. He's like, do you want to hear about the pillows? I don't know. Let's talk about that.
So the embroidery was cited in the trial. So this treason cushion was literally entered, like, as evidence, this pillow, where it's like, explain the symbolism to me.
Is this a stag? Uncertain.
And they're like, well, what does this part mean here? Like, it's like, well, that's just a hand doing some gardening. It's like, treason. Like, it's just so funny to be like, can you prove that this symbol represents this? Like, imagine, like, having that in a court where it's like, to me, it's just a pretty picture where it's like,
instead of lawyers, you need 2 English majors yelling at each other about the symbolism.
Bring in Claire Hunter, like, she can explain. So Mary was not the first royal woman to have embroidery cited in a treason trial. Fun fact. The first person where that happened was Margaret Pole from a previous episode of this podcast. I think the women locked in towers.
What else do you have to do but embroider treason? There's not a lot of other activities.
Yeah. Well, anyway. So Mary didn't hear about this right away. So this is like Walsingham is at points able to cut her off from some information. Although more and more of her staff are secretly double agents working for Walsingham, to the point that later on I think they all are.
A surprising percentage, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, her security detail was increased. At one point, Mr. Bess was told to switch her to a different room without windows so she couldn't climb out, which is, again, like Cecil knows what she does. Just like, don't give her a room with a window. Like, she will climb out that one.
She will tie a sheet together and fall out onto a horse. Do not do this.
Yeah. So Mr. Bess also decreased the amount of her staff. I believe, though, young Willie was able to stay, as was Mary Seaton. And at around the same point, a young man came to the house whose name was Anthony Babington, who was a young boy taken in by Mr. Bess as his ward after the death of his dad. So Anthony Babington, aka Tony Babs, is a little boy on the scene, not working for Mary. I think he's like maybe his like page boy. Well, I feel like at this point, everyone in the house is working for Mary because she needs 16 meals a day. And it's just like,
right.
Hey, you're my ward, but also guess what? You're also like gonna like.
Can you carry one of the 9 courses there are allowed?
Anyway, so this is where Tony Babs gets to meet Mary in the first place. He's just a little boy. Anyway, so T-Dog sentenced to death at a trial where one of the judges was Mr. Bess. Because it's just like there's 2 nobles in England. It's like the judges have to, it's either going to be Mr. Bess and it can't be T-Dog because he's the one on trial. So Mary was like, I didn't plan this conspiracy. I did not approve of this conspiracy. All I want is freedom. Elizabeth, in her way, was just like, should I sign T-Dog's death warrant? Should I not sign T-Dog's? Like, she just really pathologically, she doesn't want to commit to anything either way. Like,
yeah,
she just.
Well, but like she would be courting civil war with the nobles if she's like, there's only one duke left in England, and I killed him personally. Like,
yeah,
that's
right. Like both sides.
Move.
It's relatable in a way that she's just always frozen with indecision. Like she just can't, and she's kind of like, let's just. If I don't decide, maybe eventually this will sort itself out. Do.
It's such a mood. It's such a mood. That's how I do my taxes, Elizabeth.
What's the thing with Shakespeare in love? Like, I don't know. It just always works out. Yeah.
It's a mystery.
Also Geoffrey Rush. Anyway, so Mary began fasting. Like, her Catholic faith is really, like, legitimate, like, strong. It's where she gets her strength from. And she's, like, fasting and praying, hoping that T-Dog won't be killed, basically. But, when she doesn't eat, then that triggers her various health conditions. So that is a choice that she made. Anyway, and the prayers did not help T-Dog. He was executed. Mary's right to the English succession was revoked. She was warned if there's even a hint she was ever involved in any future plot, she would face trial. And this is like, even if someone did a plot on her behalf, she would be responsible for that. So she was left heartbroken, weeping, and refused to leave her room. #understandable.
Like, that's such an incredibly worded, like, royal proclamation that even if she didn't know about it, if someone else was doing it for her on her behalf without her knowledge, she was going to be held responsible for it. When, by the way, 3 countries and a third of the country's population here are like, I'm going to do a scheme to get, like, there's no way out of that.
Well, or it's like treason to think Elizabeth might die. It's like, right. So it's like, is it treason if someone thinks they might scheme on behalf of Mary? Is that now? Anyway. So just to end things with like a nice thing. So Mr. Bess came back from being the judge in the trial that killed her like fiance. And he was like, hey, Mary, do you want to go outside and walk? You haven't been outside in months and months and you're really sad, even though it's like snowy and winter. He might have thought she would say no, but she was just like, fuck, yes. And she went outside and just like romped around and had a nice time. And I like that for her. And then I just to wrap this up. So Rodolphe himself went to Paris, got a job working for the Pope, and then later became a senator in Florence.
What the fuck was his deal? I would love anyone to tell me.
It's wild. So that is, and like, I knew this was going to be long, and this was long, and this is the end of this episode. So a couple things I want to mention. So first of all, so there are now transcripts of the most recent episodes of Vulgar History are available if you go to vulgarhistory.com. and you click on the episode where you want to see the transcript, it should just be there for you to see. So thank you very much to Aveline Malik of the Wordery for transcribing a variety of place names, people names, and ridiculous nicknames. She does the Lord's work. Also, if you want to get a cat named Hepburn merch, which could not be... Amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm really excited. By the time this episode comes out, I don't know, I ordered myself one of the pillow covers. I want to take a picture posing actual Hepburn, who is right here right now, with the pillow. That's my goal. Anyway, so the merch is available at vulgarhistory.com/store. Oh, and also, the way it happens is when new merch is added, it's on sale. It's like 20% off for the first couple days, which I will have just posted it the day this episode comes out, so you can get your cat merchandise on sale. Anyway, vulgarhistory.com/store. And then also, if you live not in the US, anyone can order from vulgarhistory.com/store. The shipping can be a bit high depending where you live. If you're elsewhere, you can get also your Hepburn a cat merch at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com for better shipping. And I also have a Patreon page, which is patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter, where, you can get early ad-free access to all episodes. Also, Vulgar Peace Theater episodes where Allison and our friend Lana, we talk about costume dramas. I also do So This Asshole and other special bonus episodes. And I will hold up to my promise of if and when I have 500 people, members of the Patreon, I will do So This Asshole John Knox. I think currently I'm at 400, so we're getting there. If you want to just tip me over into that, you can get a 7-day free trial. So if 100 of you, I'll get a 7-day free trial simultaneously and then leave. That's fine. And I respect it. Anyway, I'm also on Instagram. All these pictures that we talked about, there'll be a link in the show notes, but also on Instagram, Vulgar History Pod. I'm on TikTok at Vulgar History. Allison, tell everybody about your book, which includes Tony Babs. It includes Walsingham.
Yes. Hepburn's Paw listener just came right into the side of our chat and tapped Anne on the cheek, which was very sweet. So she thinks you should buy merch as well. And while you're shopping, you can go for my books, A Tit for the Hangman, featuring Tony Babs and Walsingham and Mary in all of her England schemy glory. You can also pre-order book number 2, which is Let the Dead Bury the Dead, coming in October. And you can find me and my newsletter and all of my online nonsense at my website, AllisonEpstein.com.
So your newsletter is Dirtbags Through the Ages. And I don't think there's enough known about Rodolphe to do one about him, but...
No, that's mysterious weirdos through the ages, which is a very hard newsletter to research, but I'm adding some to the list.
Yeah. It would just be, I don't know. He's such a fascinating person. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for listening to this extremely long episode. We will be back again next week to begin to slowly wrap up this ongoing saga that I ridiculously thought I could cover in 4 episodes. Not true. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, Allison. Everyone keep your pants on, tits out, etc. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Anne Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Welcome to the small town of Chinook, where faith runs deep and secrets run deeper. In this new thriller, religion and crime collide when a gruesome murder rocks the isolated Montana community. Everyone is quick to point their fingers at a drug-addicted teenager, but local deputy Ruth Vogel isn't convinced. She suspects connections to a powerful religious group. Enter federal agent V.B. Laureau, who has been investigating a local church for possible criminal activity. The pair form an unlikely partnership to catch the killer, unearthing secrets that leave Ruth torn between her duty to the law, her religious convictions, and her very own family. But something more sinister than murder is afoot, and someone is watching Ruth.
Chinook, starring Kelly Marie Tran and Sanaa Lathan. Listen to Chinook wherever you get your podcasts.
Contained herein are the heresies of Radolf Buntwine, erstwhile monk turned traveling medical investigator. Join me as I study the secrets of the divine plagues and uncover the blasphemous truth that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The heresies of Radolf Buntwine, wherever podcasts are available.